Hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. How are we doing today? Ooh, ooh, ooh. It always seems like there's like last minute fixes. No matter what you do, there's always something that comes up. I am doing grand. It's nice outside today, and I'm trying to enjoy it as much as possible because in a couple days it is not going to be so nice. Well, I mean, it just won't feel like summer. It'll be spring. It'll be in like the 50s. Oh, oh, hello, Noodles. Hello. I'm doing all right. How are you doing? Just trying to pretend like it's summer for a little bit before it's no longer warm. Which it's gonna be 80 to 81 tomorrow and 42 on Monday. That's insane. That's too much. Yeah, your highs and lows are much larger than they're gonna be here. Well, I think it got up to 80 today. Yeah, I did see your post. I think it did get up to 80 today, and then tomorrow I think it's gonna be like in the 70s, but then like Saturday it gets down to like 57 and then it's just going down. So we have like a little bit more of a grace period than what you're gonna have. Yours is just chaos spiking uncontrollably. What is this like fifth spring, something like that? Love the state, but dominant seasons of weather is chaos. Yeah, yeah. I started The Jerk today because we talked about it in chat. I started it. I didn't finish it because I didn't start it early enough. I have like 30 minutes left, but I laughed out loud a couple times. But what about Second Spring? Yes, yes. I'm enjoying it so far, and I also requested from the library Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, so I will be watching that as well. I couldn't believe that the only Steve Martin movie that I've watched is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is a great movie, and I don't know why I didn't look into his other stuff. Because he's pretty funny. He's got some funny things to say and do. And like his physical comedy is just is great. And I just read his autobiography, and he said that because he's talking about, oh gosh, making the movie. He is a funny guy. He talks about making the movie, and he said that like watching it now, like his favorite line is a line that was completely ad-libbed, and that's when like he's hitchhiking like towards the beginning, and he's hitchhiking, and somebody like pulls over and is like St. Louis, and then he answers like, no, Nathan Johnson. And I just had to laugh. I had to laugh. I mean, it is a funny line in general, but knowing that he also thinks that it's funny and that it just like came natural to him is just so great. I love when ad-libbed things make the final cut in stuff. Jack Black does that a lot with like physical comedy, like the movements that he does and stuff. When what is it called? When School of Rock came out, I'm not gonna lie, I love that movie and I've watched it way too many times, and I like even with the commentary on it, and he was talking about like filming, and he would do all of these like outlandish things, and then the director would be like, okay, let's do one cut where we don't do that. And so he would, and then that would be the cut that they would put in the movie. It's so good. You love it is School of Rock is just one of those movies. Like, if I am having a bad day, I know that that movie, it's 20 this year. Stop it. That makes me upset. But also, I love that I'm talking about it like it like just came out. I haven't seen Be Kind Rewind. Also, did you enjoy D&D? Did you? I heard good things about it. Oh, you're going to go see it Tuesday. Okay. I have heard good things, but like I haven't seen it. I saw the Mario movie. Okay, good. I expect a full report. I watched the Mario movie. I thought it was cute. Got some laughs. I loved finding all of the little references to the different games and stuff. That was really fun. Yeah, it's just nerd city over here all the time, constantly. And I don't. Oh, does anybody drink sparkling ice? Because it was on sale the other day at the grocery store. It was like four for $5. And I was like, I'll try this. There's only 5 calories in it. It looks delightful. It's a little too sweet for me. And they're very, very carbonated. I just finished my last one today, and that was just so that like I wouldn't have it anymore. You're gonna go watch Mario and learn how to do the flawless Italian accent. You gotta study up, take lots of notes. Hmm. Oh, that accent. It's good. It's iconic, if you will. All right. Let's see. Reading updates. I read in the past 2 days. I finished volume 11 and volume 12 of Berserk, the deluxe editions. So I think that's through. Oh, I shouldn't have started that sentence without knowing for sure. It's through 36, volume 36, something like that. I don't know. I don't know. But something about that story, it just keeps getting better and better and better. Maybe because the author was getting older as he was writing it, and I don't know. I don't know. It's just so good. But I've talked enough about that. I'm also read volume 17 of Demon Slayer, so getting close to finishing that one. And I was just talking with my partner today. So we are taking a break from watching One Piece because we got to the time skip and we're like, let's just take a break. We have a lot of other things to watch. So we have been, but every day we think about One Piece. And the reason that we're taking a break is because it's not finished. And we figured that we would wait a little bit until like the anime starts being like released, and then we'll like binge from the time skip through so that by the time that it's like caught up on the anime, we'll be caught up. But it's just so hard. One Piece is a lifestyle. It 1,000% is. And I love it so much, which is wild because if you told that to me like 5 years ago, I would not believe you. I, I would not believe you. And not just specifically One Piece, but like anime and manga in general because like I just didn't get it like cuz I started like when I was younger and watching it and it was like I just don't understand because I never watched a show from the beginning. It was always just like whatever was on. So like I'd be thrown into these wild stories and just have no idea what's happening. It's just like this is so silly. I don't understand. There's at least not it's over 9,000. There it has to be. It has to be. I wouldn't doubt it. Hey Wadsworth, how's it going? Hello. But yeah, so we'll see. We'll see. Um, but like during the break, I think I talked about this already. We started watching Seinfeld for the first time, and we also started watching like an older anime, Evangelion, and apparently it's like the same weirdness that Akira is, which I don't know if I'm just like throwing words out and nobody knows what I'm talking about, but apparently that's the thing. Heck yes, I watched Wishbone as a kid. Of course I did. What do you think? I just didn't watch Wishbone as a kid? The little outfits for every episode were amazing and spot on. But yes. Yes. Okay, but tonight, or today. Hey Spears, how's it going? How's it going? Ah, so good. Treating little Bean, coming in, being so good, so thoughtful. Don Quixote. We Let me just show you a visual representation of how it feels like we should be really far because we're going to be starting chapter 24 and we're on page 182. We have only just begun. We've only just begun. We reading Don Quesadilla? Yes. Yes, we are. So yes, we are starting chapter 24 today. What happened last time? I Okay, let's see. This was when they're so I'm trying to think of like high notes instead of saying every single detail, which I feel like is what I usually do. This is the one piece of classic fiction. It's just never ending. Um, okay, let's see. So, high notes. Don Quixote and Sancho Panza ran into a bunch of slaves on like a chain gang type, and they talked to each one of them to see like what wrongs they did to end up to where they are. And Don Quixote decides to free them. So he frees them. They have a fight with the guards, and at the end he's like, "You need to all go back to Toboso and tell my story and say that I did this all in the name of Dulcinea and say how much I love her." Falcor, hello. uh, and they're like, "No, we're not gonna do that. But thanks for freeing us." And then they sort of like the now freed prisoners like ransack all of their supplies and take all of their food and stuff, and then scatter. So now, of course, once again, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza have no supplies, but they go up into the mountains as they're exploring around and they find a bunch of supplies that have just been left here. And Sancho is rummaging through it. He finds a bunch of money. He finds a journal that is full of poetry and notes and letters. And it turns out that this person is like a lover scorned type of a deal. And they are going through, they find this like crazed looking person who's running away, and so they follow, and then they talk to a goat herd, and the goat herd person is like, "Hey, so this person is around, and we said that he could just ask us for food and we would give him food, but he's a little off and he attacks us anyway, and we don't really know what his deal is, but he's around, he's about." uh is that the last thing that we saw or that we talked to? Maybe. I think they're still in the mountains. Yes. That's what it is. They just met him. Yes, they just came face to face with him. I did check out more of the artwork, and it is amazing. And it's the type of art where you look at it, and the longer you look at it, the more appreciation you have for it because it is so detailed, and it is like there's so much going on and there's so much to look at that it's not something that you could just like flip through. Yeah, it matches and enhances the vibe. Yes, because there is so much happening in this. And yeah, the description is great, the writing is amazing, but for sure the art would be definitely like an additive for it. And I'm a little bummed that this edition doesn't have pictures. That's fine. It's fine. But yeah, it is super beautiful. So I think that's where we are. I think we just came across the they called him the ragged one. So we'll see. And also Don Quixote is looking worse and worse as the story goes on. He's like missing a bunch of teeth now, and he's not wearing it anymore, but he had like a barber basin on his head, claiming that it was a helmet of, yesteryear and whatever. Let's do it. Let's see what misadventures they get into today. Okay. Chapter 24, in which the adventure of the Sierra Morena continues. The history says that Don Quixote paid very close attention to what was said by the tattered knight of the Sierra, who began to speak, saying, "Most certainly, Señor, whoever you may be, for I do not know you. I thank you for the demonstrations of affection and courtesy which you have shown me, and I wish I were in a position to respond with more than my desire to the goodwill you have displayed in your warm welcome. But my fate does not choose to give me anything with which to reciprocate your kindness except my sincere wish to do so." "And mine," responded Don Quixote, "is to serve you. Indeed, I had resolved not to leave these mountains until I had found you and learned from you if your sorrow, which your strange way of life indicates you are suffering, might have some kind of remedy, and if it did, to seek it with the greatest possible diligence. If your misfortune were one that had all doors closed to any sort of consolation, I intended to help you weep and lament to the best of my ability, for it is still a consolation in affliction to find someone who mourns with you. And if my good intentions deserve to be thanked with some courtesy, I entreat you, Señor, for the sake of the great courtesy I see in you, and I implore you, for the sake of the things you have loved or do love most in this life, to tell me who you are, and the reason that has compelled you to live and die in this desolate place like a wild animal, for you dwell among the beasts estranged from your true self, as demonstrated by your dress and your person. And I swear," Don Quixote added, "by the order of chivalry which I have received, though unworthy and a sinner, and by the profession of errantry, that if, Señor, you satisfy me in this, I shall serve you with the devotion to which I am obliged by being the man I am, whether to remedy your misfortune, or if that remedy to have, or to help you lament it, as I have promised you, I would." The knight of the forest, who heard the knight of the sorrowful face speak in this way, did nothing but look at him, and look at him again, and look at him one more time, from head to toe, and after he had looked at him very carefully, he said, "If you have any food to give me, then give it to me in the name of God, and after I have eaten I shall do all you ask, in gratitude for the goodwill you have shown me here." I'm just imagining looking at Don Quixote, because we're constantly getting reminders of like Don Quixote's actions and dress is not normal. And it would be so easy to be sucked into thinking that it is normal, but it's nice to have people outside of him and Sancho being like, huh. Then Sancho, from his sack, and the goatherd, from his pouch, took out food with which the ragged one satisfied his hunger, eating what they gave him as if he were stupefied, and quickly that one mouthful followed immediately on the other, for he gulped them down instead of swallowing them, and while he ate, neither he nor those who were watching him said a word. When he had finished eating, he signaled to them to follow, which they did, and he led them to a small green meadow just beyond a nearby crag. When he reached it, he lay down on the grass, and the others did the same, all of this without a word, until the Ragged One, after settling comfortably in his place, said, "If, senores, you wish me to tell you briefly about the immensity of my misfortunes, you must promise not to interrupt the thread of my sad story with any question or with anything else, because the moment you interrupt will be the moment my narration ends." These words of the Ragged One brought to Don Quixote's mind the story his squire had told him when he had not kept an accurate count of the number of goats that had crossed the river, and the story was never finished. But let us return to the Ragged One, who continues. "I give you this warning because I would like to pass quickly through the tale of my misfortunes, since bringing them to mind only serves to add new ones, and the less you ask me, the sooner I shall finish telling you about them, though I shall not fail to relate anything of importance to the complete satisfaction of your desire." Don Quixote promised, in the name of all the others, not to interrupt, and with this assurance the Ragged One began. He's reading about the idea that Don Quixote is veiled criticism on the blind, uncritical faith demanded by the Catholic Church. Ooh, that's interesting. Don Quixote is veiled criticism on the blind, uncritical faith demanded by the Catholic Church. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. What am I trying to say? that that way to read it. That's not what the word I was trying to say. Hmm. So is Don Quixote the one that is blindly following, or is everybody else the one who's blindly following and he's the one who's like, this is the way? Well, I guess he would be the one because he's the one who's reading all of the chivalry books and following them like to the letter. That's interesting. And anytime somebody critiques him or says that something isn't real or questions, he just sort of either ignores or like bulldozes through with his ideas. Mm. The idea that being the idea being that kind of faith leads one to madness. Yeah. Interesting, interesting. Yeah, I can totally see it being read that way. Thank you. Uh, my name is Cardenio. My home, one of the finest cities in Andalusia. My family, noble. My parents, wealthy. My misfortune, so great that my parents had to weep and my family grieve, but their wealth could not alleviate it, for worldly possessions can do little to remedy the afflictions sent by heaven. And there is a note here. After his name, Cardenio, it says, "A lost play by Shakespeare. The history of Cardenio was apparently based on Cardenio's tale. An English translation of the first part of Don Quixote appeared only a few years after its initial publication in 1605. In that same city there lived a heaven, in which love placed all the glory I could desire. Such is the beauty of Lucinda, a maiden as noble and as wealthy as I, but more fortunate and less firmly resolved than my honorable intentions merited. I loved Lucinda. I worshipped and adored her from my earliest youth, and she loved me with all the simplicity and innocence of her tender years. Our parents knew of our intentions and were not troubled by them because they saw clearly that, in time, these intentions could have no other end but our marriage, something that was practically guaranteed by the equality of our families and our fortunes. We matured, as did our love, until it seemed to Lucinda's father that, in deference to public opinion, he was obliged to deny me entrance to his house, almost imitating in this regard the parents of that same Thisbe praised so often by poets. And this denial added more flames to the fire and more ardor to our desire, because, although it silenced our tongues, it could not silence our pens, which, which, with greater freedom than tongues, tend to reveal to the person we love what is hidden in our souls. For often the presence of the beloved confuses and silences the most determined intention and the boldest tongue. Oh heavens, the letters I wrote to her, the delicate, virtuous responses I received, the songs and love poems I composed in which I declared my soul and transcribed its sentiments, depicted its burning desires, prolonged its memories, and recreated its yearnings. Finally, finding myself in such an agitated state and seeing that my soul was being consumed with the desire to see her, I resolved to take action, and to do in a moment what seemed necessary to achieve the prize I longed for and deserved, which was to ask her father for her hand in marriage. This I did, to which he replied by thanking me for the desire to honor him, which I had demonstrated, and the wish to honor myself with his beloved treasure. But, since my father was alive, it was his rightful duty to make the request, because if it were not wholeheartedly desired and wanted by him, Lucinda was not a woman to be taken or given furtively. I thanked him for his kindness, thinking that he was correct in what he said, and that my father would agree as soon as I told him, and with this purpose in mind I went immediately to my father, to tell my father what I desired. When I entered the room I found him with an open letter in his hand, and before I could say a word he handed it to me and said, "In this letter you will see Cardenio, the desire that Duke Ricardo has to favor you. This Duke Ricardo, senores, as you probably know, is a grandee of Spain whose lands are the best in Andalusia." I took the letter and read it, and it was so insistent and complimentary, oh my gosh. I'm having a rough time over here. I took the letter and read it, and it was so insistent and complimentary that even I thought it would be incorrect if my father failed to carry out what it requested, which was that he send me immediately to the Duke's estate to be a companion, not a servant, to his oldest son, and the Duke would be responsible for granting me the rank that would correspond to the esteem in which he held me. Do you even word, bro? I mean, sometimes. Rarely. I read the letter and kept silent as I read it, especially when I heard my father say, "You will leave in 2 days' time, Cardenio, to do as the Duke desires, and you should give thanks to God for opening the way for you to achieve what I know you deserve." To these words he added others of fatherly advice. The time for my departure approached. I spoke one night to Lucinda, and told her everything that had happened, and I did the same with my father, asking him to wait a few days and delay his response until I knew what Ricardo wanted of me. He promised he would, and she confirmed it with 1,000 vows and 1,000 swoons. In short, I arrived at the estate of Duke Ricardo. I was so well received and treated by him that envy immediately began its work, and affected the older retainers, who thought the indications the Duke gave of wanting to favor me would work against them. The one who seemed happiest at my arrival was the Duke's younger son, named Fernando, a gallant, charming youth, magnanimous, and inclined to fall in love, who in a very short time showed so great a desire for my friendship that everyone spoke of it, and although the oldest son was fond of me and favored me, he did not go as far as Don Fernando in his affectionate treatment. Now, since there are no secrets between friends, and the preference shown by Don Fernando was no longer preference but friendship, he told me all his thoughts, especially one having to do with love, which was causing him some concern. He was in love with a peasant girl, one of his father's vassals, whose parents were very wealthy, and she was so beautiful, modest, discreet, and virtuous that no one who knew her could decide in which of these she showed greater excellence or distinction. These outstanding traits in the beautiful peasant so intensified the desires of Don Fernando that he had decided, in order to achieve his desires and conquer her integrity, to promise to be her husband. Otherwise, He would be striving for the impossible. And there is a note. After husband, a promise of marriage was considered a legally binding contract. Oh my gosh. I can't even speak when I'm not reading, so I totally get it. Under the obligation imposed by his friendship, and using the best arguments I knew and the most vivid examples I could think of, I attempted to dissuade and discourage him from his intention, but seeing that it was to no avail, I resolved to tell Duke Ricardo, his father, of the matter. But Don Fernando, an astute and discerning man, suspected and feared this, for it seemed to him that I was obliged, as a good retainer, not to hide anything that could so damage the honor of my lord and duke, and so, to distract and deceive me, he said he could find no other remedy that would remove from his thoughts the beauty that held him captive than to leave for a few months, and what he desired was for the two of us to go to my father's house, and he would tell the duke that this was an opportunity to see and purchase some of the very good horses in my city, which is mother to the best of the world. As soon as I heard him say this, I was moved by my own affections to approve his plan as one of the most sensible anyone could imagine, and I would have done so even if it had not been as good, because it was an excellent opportunity and occasion for me to see my Lucinda again. With this thought and desire, I approved his idea and supported his plan, telling him to put it into effect as quickly as possible because, in truth, absence would do its work. Oh my gosh.
Hello, everybody. 9 whole months. My sub baby is here.
Star. Thank you so much for the 9 months. You're sub baby. Oh my gosh. Thank you so, so much. I'm so glad you're here and sticking around. Can't believe 9 months. That's insane. Oh my gosh. Brooklyn, 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 Brooklyn. There we go. Thank you so much for the follow. Oh man, okay. Did I lose my place? I would never. Okay, here we are. When he told me of his proposal, he had already, as I learned later, enjoyed the peasant girl by claiming to be her husband. Oh wait, that's not at all where we are. Okay. Under the obligation of imposed by his friendship and using the best arguments I knew and the most vivid examples I could think of. No, we already read that too. Oh my gosh. I was right the first time. Apologies. When he told me of his proposal, he had already, as I learned later, enjoyed the peasant girl by claiming to be her husband, and he was hoping for an opportunity to disclose this at a safe distance, fearful of what his father, the Duke, would do when he learned of his foolishness. And it happened that, since love in young men is, for the most part, nothing but appetite, which, having pleasure as its ultimate goal, ends when that goal is achieved, and what seemed to be love must recede because it cannot go beyond the limits placed on it by nature, such limits not being placed on true love. What I mean to say is that as soon as Don Fernando had enjoyed the pleasant girl, his longings abated and his desires cooled, and if at first he pretended to want to go away in order to remedy them, now he really wanted to leave in order not to act on them. The Duke gave his permission and told me to accompany him. We came to my city. My father gave him a warm... No. We came to my city. My father gave him a welcome proper to his rank. I saw Lucinda immediately. My desires were rekindled, though they had not been dead or dampened, and, to my sorrow, I spoke of them to Don Fernando, because it seemed to me that, given the great friendship he had shown me, I ought not hide anything from him. Yep, that's exactly what that is. I praised the beauty, grace, and discretion of Lucinda in such a way that my praise awakened in him a desire to see a maiden adorned with so many virtues. I satisfied his desire, much to my misfortune, and showed her to him one night, by the light of a candle at a window where the two of us would talk. He saw her in a dressing gown, and the sight of her made him forget all the beauty he had seen until then. He fell silent, lost all sense of his surroundings, was entranced, and finally fell in love to the degree that you will see in the course of the story of my afflictions. To further heighten his desire, which he concealed from me and revealed only to heaven when he was alone, one day he happened to find one of her letters and asked me to ask her father for her hand, and it was so discreet, so virtuous, and so loving that when he had read it, he told me that in Lucinda alone one could find concentrated the gifts of beauty and intelligence that were divided among all the other women in the world. It is certainly true, and I wish to confess now that even though I saw with what just cause Don Fernando praised Lucinda, it troubled me to hear that praise from his mouth, and I began to fear and mistrust him because not a moment went by when he did not wish to speak of Lucinda. And when he would initiate the conversation about her with any far-fetched excuse which awakened in me a certain jealousy, though not because I feared any kind of change in the goodness and good faith of Lucinda, even so, I began to be apprehensive with regard to the very future about which she gave me assurances. Don Fernando always wanted to read the letters I sent to Lucinda, and the ones she sent back to me, claiming that he enjoyed the wit we both displayed. It so happened that Lucinda had asked me for a book of chivalry, of which she was very fond, which was Amadis of Gaul. As soon as Don Quixote heard him mention the book of chivalry, he asked, "If your grace had told me at the beginning of your history that her grace the Lady Lucinda was fond of books of chivalry, no other embellishment would have been necessary to allow me to grasp the elevation of her understanding, for I would not have considered it as fine as you, Signor, have depicted it, if it had lacked the ability to enjoy such delightful reading, and so, as far as I am concerned, there is no need to use more words in declaring her beauty, worth, and understanding. By simply knowing of this fondness, I affirm her to be the most beautiful and discreet woman in the world. I would have liked, Signor, for your grace to have sent her along with the Amadis of Gaul, the worthy Don Rojal of Greece, for I know that the Lady Lucinda would have enjoyed Dareda and Gorea, and the shepherd Daranel's wit and the admiral bucolic verses sung and represented by him with all charm, discretion, and eloquence." And there is a note after Don Rogel of Greece, and it says, "This is the 11th of the books about Amadis and his descendants." But by the time they may come when that lack can be corrected, and the correction can be made as soon as your grace has the goodness to return with me to my village, for there I can give you more than 300 books, which are the joy of my soul and the delight of my life, although it occurs to me that I may no longer have a single one due to the malice of evil and envious enchanters. Your grace, forgive me for having broken our promise not to interrupt your account, but when I hear things having to do with chivalry and knights-errant, I can no more not talk of them than the rays of the sun can fail to warm, or those of the moon to dampen, and so forgive me, and continue, which is the most pertinent thing now. I think it's funny that he says that he has so many books back at home and he would be happy to give them, and then instantly remembers that well, in his eyes, that the room just doesn't exist anymore. But when he was passed out and recovering from his injuries, it was that room was cemented shut so that he wouldn't be going into the library to be reading chivalry books anymore. While Don Quixote was saying what has been said, Cardenio had lowered his head to his chest, showing signs of being lost in deep thought. And although Don Quixote asked him twice to go on with his history, he did not raise his head or say a word. But after some time had gone by, he did raise his head, saying, "I cannot help but think. Nor is there anyone in the world who can make me change my mind or lead me to believe otherwise, and whoever does not think or believe so is a villain, that the great scoundrel, the surgeon master, Elizabeth, and the lover of Queen Madasima, that's it, Madasima. And there's a note, and it says, Queen Madasima, a character in the Amadis of Gaul, did not have a romantic relationship with the surgeon Elizabeth. No, by my faith, Don Quixote responded with great wrath, and an oath, as was his custom. That is wicked, or rather villainous. Queen Madasima, oh man, I will get the accent right, eventually. Madasima was a very distinguished lady, and it should not be assumed that so high a princess would become the paramour of a sawbones and a quack, and whoever believes the contrary is lying, like the base scoundrel he is. And this I will make him understand, on foot or mounted, armed or unarmed, by night or by day, or in whatever manner he prefers. Cardenio looked at him attentively, for a fit of his madness had come over him, and he was in no condition to go on with his story. Nor was Don Quixote prepared to hear it, so vexed was he by what he had heard about Madasima. How extraordinary, for it enraged him as if she really were his true and natural queen. That is what his perverse books had done to him. And so I say that since Cardenio was mad again, and he heard himself called liar and villain and other similar insults, he did not take it lightly, and he picked up a stone that was lying near him, and with it struck such a blow to Don Quixote's chest that it knocked him flat on his back. Sancho Panza, when he saw what had been done to his master, attacked the madman with a clenched fist, and the ragged one received him in such a way that with one blow he had Sancho lying on his feet, and then he jumped up and down on his ribs with great enthusiasm. The same fate awaited the goatherd, who tried to defend Sancho, and when Cardenio had battered and bruised them all, he left them and went, calmly and peaceably, to take refuge in the mountains. Sancho got to his feet and was so angry at finding himself beaten for so little cause that he tried to take his revenge on the goatherd, saying it was his fault for not having warned them that the man suffered fits of madness. If they had known this, they would have been prepared and ready to defend themselves. The goatherd responded that he had told them, and if Sancho had not heard him, he was not to blame. Sancho Panza replied, and so did the goatherd, and all the replies ended in each seizing the other's beard and exchanging so many blows that if Don Quixote had not stopped them, they would have beaten each other to a pulp. Sancho said, as he kept hold of the goatherd, Your Grace, Señor Knight of the sorrowful face, let me be, for with this one, who is low-born like myself, and not a knight, I'm free to avenge his offence against me, fighting him hand to hand like an honourable man. That is true, said Don Quixote, but I know he is not to blame for what has happened. Saying this, he pacified him, and Don Quixote asked the goatherd again if it would be possible to find Cardenio, because he wanted very much to know the end of the story. The goatherd said what he had said earlier, that he was not certain where he stayed, but if he wandered the area, Don Quixote could not fail to find him, either in his right mind or out of it. End of the chapter. All right, so they talked to the ragged one and got the start of the story. But I think we can guess the end of the story. And my guess, having not read it, is that his buddy, Don Fernando, woos his love, Lucinda. And that's what, like, drove him mad, and that's why he's here. Raging in the mountains. And yeah, going back to enjoyed the peasant girl, uh, the way that the writing is, it's very smart. Like, there were poop jokes, but like written not like poop jokes, if that makes sense. It's very smartly written, and I think that adds to the humor of it. But, you know. All right. Chapter 25, which tells of the strange events that befell the valiant knight of La Mancha in the Sierra Morena and his imitation of the penance of Beltenebros. And then we immediately have a footnote for Beltenebros, and it says the knight's penance is a favorite topic in the books of chivalry. Beltenebros is the name taken by Amadis during his penance. It suggests dark beauty or beautiful dark. Interesting. Interesting. Don Quixote took his leave of the goatherd, and mounting Rocinante once again, he told Sancho to follow him, which he did, on his donkey, very unwillingly. Gradually they were entering the most rugged part of the mountains, and Sancho, longing to talk to his master but not wanting to disobey his orders, waited for him to begin the conversation. Unable to endure so much silence, however, Sancho said, Señor Don Quixote, your grace should give me your blessing and let me leave, because now I want to go back to my house and my wife and my children, for with them at least I'll talk and speak all I want. Your grace wanting me to go with you through these deserted places by day and by night without talking whenever I feel like it is like burying me alive. If animals could still talk the way they did in the days of Giuseppe, it wouldn't be so bad because I could talk to my donkey whenever I wanted to, and that would help me bear my misfortunes. It's a hard thing, and not something to be borne patiently when a man's searching his whole life and doesn't find anything but kicks and tosses in a blanket, stones and fists hitting him, and still he has to keep his mouth shut tight, not daring to say what's in his heart, like a mute. Okay, and then we do have a footnote after Giuseppe. It says, this was a popular name for Aesop among the uneducated. There you go. I understand you very well, Sancho, responded Don Quixote. You long to have the interdiction which I have placed on your tongue lifted. Consider it lifted, and say whatever you wish, on the condition that this license lasts no longer than the time we spend traveling through these mountains. That's fine, said Sancho. Let me talk now, for only God knows what will happen later, and I'll begin to enjoy this freedom now and ask why was it that your grace defended so strongly that Queen Majamasa, or whatever her name is, and what difference did it make about that abbot was her lover or not? There's a note after abbot, and it says, this is Sancho's misunderstanding of the name Elizabeth. For if your grace had let it pass, since you weren't her judge, I think the madman would have gone on with his story, and we would have avoided stones and kicks, and more than half a dozen punches. By my faith, Sancho, responded Don Quixote, if you knew as I do what an honorable and distinguished lady Queen Madasima was, I know you would say that I showed a good deal of forbearance, for I did not smash the mouth that uttered such blasphemies, because it is an exceedingly great blasphemy to say or think that a queen would take a surgeon as her lover. The truth of the matter is that Master Elisabet, mentioned by the madman, was a very prudent man and a wise counsellor, and he served as tutor and physician to the queen. but to think that she was his mistress is an outrage deserving of the most severe punishment. And so that you may see that Cardenio did not know what he was saying, you should realize that when he said it, he was not in his right mind. That's just what I'm saying, said Sancho. There wasn't any reason to pay attention to the words of a madman, because if luck hadn't been with your grace, and the stone had hit your head in the way it hit your chest, then what kind of condition would we have been in to defend that lady? May God confound her, and by my faith, Cardenio wouldn't have been pardoned because he's crazy. Against sane men and madmen, every knight-errant is obliged to defend the honor of ladies, no matter who they may be, and especially queens of such high birth and distinction as Queen Madasima, for whom I have a particular regard because of her many virtues. In addition to her being beauteous, she was also very prudent and long-suffering in her calamities, of which she had many, and the advice of companionship of Master Elizabeth were of great benefit and comfort to her, and helped her to endure her travail and with prudence and patience. And the vulgar and low-born took advantage of this to say and think that she was his mistress. And I say that all those who say and think such a thing, and lie again, and will lie another 200 times whenever they say or think it. I don't say it, and I don't think it, responded Sancho. If they're a fair, and let them eat it with their bread, whether or not they were lovers, they've already made their accounting with God. I tend to my vines. It's their business, not mine. I don't stick my nose in. If you buy and lie, your purse wants to know why. Besides, naked I was born, and naked I'll die. I don't lose or gain a thing. Whatever they were, it's all the same to me. And many folks think there's bacon when there's not even a hook to hang it on. But who can put doors on a field? Let them say what they please. I don't care. Lord save me, said Don Quixote. What a lot of foolish things you put on the same thread, Sancho. What does the subject of our conversation have to do with the proverbs you string together like beads? If you value your life, Sancho, be quiet, and from now on tend to spurring your donkey, and leave matters alone that do not concern you. And know with all 5 of your senses that everything I have done, am doing, and shall do follows the dictates of reason and the laws of chivalry, which I know better than all the knights in the world who have professed them. Spit in those sick rhymes. I was thinking the same thing. Oh, Sancho. Sancho's definitely the hype man, but also like the cautious hype man. Señor, responded Sancho, is it a law of chivalry that we should wander through these mountains with no path or direction, looking for a madman who, when he's found, may feel like finishing what he began? And I don't mean his story, but your grace's head and my ribs, and break them completely. I tell you again, Sancho, to be quiet, said Don Quixote, because you should know that it is not only my desire to find the madman that brings me to these parts, but also my desire to perform a deed that will bring me perpetual fame and renown throughout the known world. And it will be so great a deed that with it I shall put the crowning touch on all that can make a knight-errant perfect and worthy of fame. And is this deed very dangerous? Asked Sancho Panza. No, responded the knight of the sorrowful face, although depending on luck and the throw of the dice, our fortunes may be either favorable or adverse, but everything will depend on your diligence. On my diligence, said Sancho. Yes, said Don Quixote, because if you return quickly from the place where I intend to send you, then my suffering will end quickly, and my glory will quickly commence. And since it is not right to keep you in suspense, I'm waiting to hear where my words will lead. I want you, Sancho, to know that the famous Amadis of Gaul was one of the most perfect knights-errant. I've misspoken. Not one of, but the sole, the first, the only, the lord of all those in the world during his lifetime. Bad luck and worse fortune for Don Belianis and for anyone else who may claim to be his equal in anything, because, by my troth, they are deceived. I say, too, that when a painter wishes to win fame in his art, he attempts to copy the original works of the most talented painters he knows. This same rule applies to all the important occupations and professions that serve to embellish nations, and it must be, and is, followed when the man who wishes to be known as prudent and long-suffering imitates Ulysses, in whose person and hardships Homer painted a living portrait of prudence and forbearance. Virgil, too, in the person of Aeneas, portrayed for us the valor of a devoted son and the sagacity of a valiant and experienced captain. They were depicted and described not as they were, but as they should have been, to serve as examples of virtue to men who came after them. In the same manner, Amadis was the pole star, the morning star, the sun to valiant, enamored knights, the one who should be imitated by all of us who serve under the banner of love and chivalry. This being true, and it is, then I deduce, friend Sancho, that the knight-errant who most closely imitates Amadis will be closest to attaining chivalric perfection, and one of the things in which this knight most clearly showed his prudence, valor, courage, patience, constancy, and love was when, scorned by the Lady Oriana, he withdrew to do penance on the Peña Pobre, calling himself Bel Tenebros, a name truly significant and suited to the life he voluntarily had chosen. And there's a note here after Peña Pobre, and it says Peña Pobre can be translated as poor rock or bare rock, or, to retain the alliteration, Mount Mournful. It is therefore easier for me to imitate him in this fashion than by cleaving giants in two, beheading serpents, slaying dragons, routing armies, thwarting armadas, and undoing enchantments. And since this terrain is so appropriate for achieving that end, there is no reason not to seize opportunity by the forelock when it is convenient to do so. There's another note. The figure of opportunity, capital O, was traditionally represented as bald, except for one lock of hair, which, with the proverbial brass ring, one had to grasp and hold on to. In fact, said Sancho, what is it that your grace wants to do in this lonely place? Pingui, thank you so much for the follow. Glad you're here. Have I not already told you, responded Don Quixote, that I wish to imitate Amadis, playing the part of one who is desperate, a fool, a madman, thereby imitating as well the valiant Don Roland when he discovered in a fountain the signs that Angelica the Fair had committed base acts with Medoro, and his grief drove him mad, and he uprooted trees, befouled the waters of clear fountains, killed shepherds, destroyed livestock, burned huts, demolished houses, pulled down mares, and did 100,000 other unheard of things worthy of eternal renown and record. And since I do not intend to imitate Roland, or Roldan, or Orlando, or Ortolando, for he had all of those names, in every detail of all the mad things he did, said, and thought, I shall, to the best of my ability, sketch an outline of those that seem most essential to me, and it well may be that I shall be content with the imitation solely of Amadis, who, with no harmful mad acts, but only outbursts of weeping and grief, achieved as much fame as anyone else. It seems to me, said Sancho, that the knights who did these things were provoked and had a reason to do senseless things and penances But what reason does your grace have for going crazy? What lady has scorned you, and what signs have you found to tell you that my lady Dulcinea of Toboso has done anything foolish with Moor or Christian? Therein lies the virtue, responded Don Quixote, and the excellence of my enterprise. For a knight-errant deserves neither glory nor thanks if he goes mad for a reason. The great achievement is to lose one's reason for no reason, and to let my lady know that if I can do this without cause, what should I not do if there were cause? Moreover, I have more than enough reason because of my long absence from her, who, my forever lady, Dulcinea of Toboso, as you heard the shepherd Ambrosio say. Sorry, the name is divided between two lines. Ambrosio say, all ills are suffered and feared by one who is absent. And so, friend Sancho, do not waste time advising me to abandon so rare, so felicitous, so extraordinary an imitation. Mad I am, and mad I shall remain until you return with the reply to a letter which I intend to send with you to my lady Dulcinea, if it is such as my fidelity warrants. My madness and my penance will come to an end. If it is not, I shall truly go mad and not feel anything. Therefore, no matter her reply, I shall emerge from the struggle and travail in which you leave me, taking pleasure as a sane man in the good news you bring, or as a madman, not suffering on account of the bad news you bear. But tell me, Sancho, have you kept the helmet of Mambrino safe? For I saw you pick it up from the ground when that ingrate tried to shatter it, but he could not, and in this case we can see how finely it is tempered. To which Sancho replied, by God, Señor Knight of the Sorrowful Face, but I lose my patience and can't bear some of the things your grace says. Because of them, I even imagine that everything you tell me about chivalry, and winning kingdoms and empires, and giving me insulas, and granting me other favors and honors, as is the custom of knights-errant, must be nothing but empty talk and lies, and all Hamburg, or humbug, or whatever you call it, because if anyone heard your grace calling a barber's basin the helmet of Mambrino without realizing the error after more than 4 days, what could he think but that whoever says and claims such a thing must be out of his mind? I have the basin in the bag, all dented, and I'm taking it along so I can fix it when I get home and use it to trim my beard if, some day, by the grace of God, I ever find myself with my wife and children again. Well, Sancho, by the same oath you swore before, I swear to you, said Don Quixote, that you have the dimmest wits that any squire in the world has or ever had. The basin must be saved. Save the basin. Is it possible that in all the time you have travelled with me you have not yet noticed that all things having to do with knights-errant appear to be chimerical, foolish, senseless, and turned inside out? And not because they really are, but because hordes of enchanters always walk among us, and alter and change everything and turn things into whatever they please, according to whether they wish to favour us or destroy us. And so, what seems to you a barber's basin seems to me the helmet of Mambrino, and will seem another thing to someone else. It was rare foresight on the part of the wise man who favors me to make what is really and truly the helmet of Mambrino seem a basin to everyone else, because it is held in such high esteem that whoever could pursue me in order to take it from me, but since they see it as only a barber's basin, they do not attempt to obtain it, as was evident when that man tried to shatter it, then left it on the ground, not taking it away from him. By my faith, if he had recognized it for what it was, he never would have left it behind. Keep it, my friend, since I have no need of it for the moment. Rather, I must remove all this armor and be as naked as the day I was born, as if I wish in my penance to follow Roland more than Amadis. Sancho has the case of the Mondays. We all get like that. It is interesting when Sancho goes along with Don Quixote and when he's like, Dude. Dude. Amadis. Man, every time I look away, I immediately lose my page. Oh, here we go. I found it. As they were conversing, they came to the foot of a high mountain, which, almost like a peak carved out of the rock, stood alone among the many others that surrounded it. At its base there flowed a gentle stream, and all around it lay a meadow so green and luxuriant it brought joy to the eyes that gazed upon it. There were many woodland trees and plants and flowers, making it a peaceful spot. The Knight of the Sorrowful Face chose this place to carry out his penance, and so, as soon as he saw it, he began to say in a loud voice, as if he had lost his reason, "This is the place I designate and choose, O heavens, to weep for the misfortune to which you have condemned me. This is the place where the humor of my eyes will increase the waters of this small stream, and my continual deep sighs will constantly move the leaves of these untamed trees in testimony to and as proof of the grief that afflicts my troubled heart. And oh, you rustic gods, whoever you may be, who dwell in this desolate place, hear the laments of this unfortunate lover, brought by long absence and imagined jealousy to this harsh terrain, to complain and weep over the unyielding nature of that ungrateful beauty, the culmination and perfection of all human comeliness. Oh, you nymphs and dryads, who are wont to dwell in thickets and forests, loved, although in vain, by wanton and lustful satyrs. May they ne'er be disturbed. May they ne'er disturb your sweet tranquillity, and may you help me lament my misfortune, or at least not grow weary of hearing it. O Dulcinea Toboso, day of my night, glory of my grief, guide of my travels, star of my good fortune, may heaven grant all that thou mayest request, just as thou considereth the place and plight to which thy absence hath led me, and respondeth with the favor merited by my faithfulness. O solitary trees that from this day forth will accompany my solitude, give a sign with the gentle movement of your branches that my presence doth not displease you. O thou, my squire, amiable companion of my favorable and adverse adventures, take note and fix in thy mind what thou wilt see me do here, so that thou mayest recount and relate it to the sole cause of all my actions. I think I'm going to start speaking like this in regular conversation, which seems like it would be as absurd as how Don Quixote is speaking. And having said this, he dismounted Rocinante, and in an instant removed the bit and saddle, and slapping the horse on the rump, he said, "Liberty is given to thee by him who hath none, O steed, as great in thy deeds as thou art unfortunate in thy destiny. Goest thou whither thou wilt, for on thy forehead it is written that the hippogriff of Astolfo was not thy equal in speed, nor the renowned Frontino that cost Bradamante so dear." There's a footnote. It says, "The hippogriff, a winged horse, the Frontino, the horse of Ruggiero, Bradamante's lover, appear in Ariosto's Orlando Furioso. Frontino is also mentioned by Boiardo in Orlando's Inamorado." I am doing great with names, let me tell ya. Seeing this, Sancho said, "Good luck to whoever spared us the trouble of unsaddling the gray. By my faith, we would have plenty of little slaps to give that donkey, and plenty of things to say in his praise. But if he were here, I wouldn't agree to anybody unsaddling him, because there'd be no need to. He couldn't be described as a lover or a desperate, since his master, who was me so long as God was willing, wasn't those things either. There is a note. It's after unsaddling the gray, and it's a long one. It says, over the years, the question of exactly when Sancho's donkey was stolen has been a matter of some controversy among Cervantine scholars, like Cervantes scholars. That's fun. According to the first edition, published in 1605, this is the initial indication that a theft has taken place. In the second edition, however, published a few months after the first, a passage inserted in chapter 23 states that Ginez de Pasamonte, the galley slave, steals the donkey while Sancho is sleeping. Martin de Ricoeur, editor of the text on which this translation is based, adheres consistently to the first edition, citing the added passage in a footnote, but not including it in the body of the text. In brief, then, through an oversight of Cervantes or the printer, Juan de la Cuesta, the first edition did not prepare the reader for the fact that the donkey has been stolen. Despite the subsequent corrections in the second part of Don Quixote, published in 1615, Cervantes alludes to this omission in chapter 3 and apparently accepts criticism of the omission as valid. Interesting. They mentioned in a footnote previously about when the donkey was stolen, and that's interesting. And I love that there's scholars dedicated to Cervantes. I love it. I mean, I don't know why there wouldn't be. There are Tolkien scholars. It makes sense. It just makes sense. Okay, let's see. The truth is, Signor, Knight of the Sorrowful Face, that if my leaving and your Grace's madness are serious, it would be a good idea to saddle Rocinante again and let him take the place of the Grey, which would make my going and coming shorter. If I make the trip on foot, I don't know when I'll arrive or when I'll get back, because, to make a long story short, I'm a very poor walker. What I say, Sancho, responded Don Quixote, is that it will be as you wish, for your plan does not seem to be a bad one, and I also say that 3 days hence you will leave here, because in that time I want you to see what I do and say for her sake, so that you can recount it to her. But what else do I have to see, said Sancho, besides what I've seen already? How little you know, responded Don Quixote. Now I have to tear my clothes, toss aside my armor, and hit my head against these rocks, along with other things of that nature, all of which will astonish you. That would actually astonish me. Cervantes' goat ate those pages. I want that to be true. For the love of God, said Sancho, your grace should be careful how you go around hitting your head, because you might come up against a boulder that's so hard that with the first blow you put an end to the whole plan of this penance. In my opinion, if your grace believes that hitting your head is necessary, and you can't do this without it, you should be content, since it's all make-believe and fake and a joke, with knocking your head on water or something else that's soft, like cotton. Leave the rest to me, and I'll tell my lady that your grace was hitting your head against the sharp edge of a boulder that was harder than a diamond. I thank you for your good intentions, friend Sancho, responded Don Quixote. But I want you to realize that all the things I am doing are not jokes, but very real. Otherwise, I would be contravening the rules of chivalry that command us never to lie, or else suffer the punishment of those who relapse into sin. And doing one thing instead of another is the same as lying. And so, my head hittings have to be real, solid, and true, with no sophistry or fantasy about them. And, It will be necessary for you to leave me some lint bandages to heal my wounds, since it was our misfortune to lose the balm. Losing the donkey was more serious, responded Sancho, because when he lost him, we lost the bandages and everything else, and I beg your grace to say no more about that cursed potion. Just hearing its name turns my soul, not to mention my stomach. And I beg something else. Just assume that the 3 days you gave me to see the mad things you do have already passed, because as far as I'm concerned, I've seen them, and judged them, and will tell wonderful things about them to my lady. So write the letter now, and send me on my way, because I have a great desire to come back and take your grace out of this purgatory where I'm leaving you. You call it purgatory, Sancho, said Don Quixote. You would do better to call it hell, and even worse, if anything can be worse. Whoever's in hell, responded Sancho. Nulla es retencio, or so I've heard. There's a note, of course. It says, this is Sancho's corruption of a Latin phrase in the service of the dead. Oh my gosh, and then it's in Latin. Quia in inferno nulla est redemptio. I do not understand what retencio means, said Don Quixote. Retencio means, responded Sancho, that whoever is in hell never gets out and can't get out, which is just the opposite of your grace, unless my feet go the wrong way when I use the spurs to liven up Rocinante. Just put me once and for all into Toboso, before my lady Dulcinea, and I'll tell her such wonders about the foolish things and the crazy things, because they amount to the same thing, that your grace has done and is still doing, that she'll become softer than a glove, even if I find her harder than a cork tree, with her sweet and honeyed reply. I'll come flying back through the air like a wizard, and I'll take your grace out of this purgatory that seems like hell but isn't, since there's a hope of getting out, which, as I said before, the people in hell don't have, and I don't think your grace will say otherwise. That is true, said the knight of the sorrowful face, but what shall we use to write the letter? And the order for the donkeys, too, added Sancho. There's a note. In the passage regarding the theft of the donkey, which was inserted in chapter 23 in the second edition, Don Quixote offers Sancho his own donkey as compensation for his loss. What a guy. Everything will be included, said Don Quixote, and it would be a good idea, since we have no paper, to write it, as the ancients did, on the leaves of trees, or on some wax tablets, although they would be difficult to find now as paper. But it occurs to me that it would be good, and even better than good, to write it in the notebook that belonged to Cardenio, and you will take care to have it transcribed onto paper, in a fine hand, in the first town you come to where there is a schoolmaster, or else some sacristan can transcribe it for you, but do not give it to any notary, for their writing is so difficult to read that not even Satan can understand it. And what do we do about the signature? Said Sancho. The letters of Amadis were never signed, responded Don Quixote. That's fine, responded Sancho, but the order must be signed, and if it's copied, they'll say the signature is false, and I won't have my donkeys. The order will be written in the same notebook, and it will be signed, and when my niece sees it, there will be no difficulty putting it into effect. As for the love letter, as a signature you will have them put, Thine until death, the Knight of the Sorrowful Face. And it will not matter if it is written in another hand, because, if I remember correctly, Dulcinea does not know how to read or write, and never in her life has she seen my writing or a letter of mine, because my love and her love have always been platonic, not going beyond a virtuous glance. And even this was so infrequent that I could truly swear that in the 12 years I have loved her more than the light of these eyes that will be consumed by the earth. I have not seen her more than 4 times, and it well may be that with regard to these 4 times she might not have noticed the one time I looked at her. Such is the retirement and seclusion in which her father, Lorenzo Corchuelo, and her mother, Aldonza Nogales, have reared her. Well, well, said Sancho. Are you saying that Lorenzo's daughter, also known as Aldonza Lorenzo, is the Lady Dulcinea of Toboso? She is, said Don Quixote, and she is worthy of being lady and mistress of the entire universe. I forgot that Don Quixote just gives people names, and of course, Dulcinea of Toboso is not her actual name. I don't know why I didn't think that, but here we are. Here we are. Eugenio has a question. Um, I wouldn't say necessarily, no. But I mean, I'm not great at giving advice. I know her very well, said Sancho, and I can say that she can throw a metal bar just as well as the brawniest lad in the village. Praise our Maker. She's a fine girl in every way, sturdy as a horse, and just the one to pull any knight-errant or about to be an errant, who has her for his lady, right out of the mud hole he's fallen into. Damn, but she's strong, and what a voice she has. I can tell you that one day she stood on top of the village bell tower to call some shepherds who were in one of her father's fields, and even though they were more than half a league away, they heard her just as if they were standing at the foot of the tower. And the best thing about her is that she's not a prude. In fact, she's something of a trollop. Right? She jokes with everybody and laughs and makes fun of everything. Now I say, Signor, Knight of the Sorrowful Face, that your grace not only can and should do crazy things for her, but with good cause you can be desperate and hang yourself. There won't be anybody who knows about it who won't say you did the right thing, even if the devil carries you off. And I'd like to be on my way, just for the chance to see her. I haven't seen her for a long time, and she must be changed by now, because women's faces become very worn when they're always out in the fields, in the sun and wind, and I confess to your grace, Señor Don Quixote, that till now I lived in a great ignorance, because I really and truly thought the Lady Dulcinea must be a princess your grace was in love with, or the kind of person who deserved the rich presents your grace sent to her, like the Basque and the galley slaves, and probably many others, just as many as the victories your grace won in the days before I was your squire. But thinking it over carefully, what good does it do Aldonza Lorenzo? I mean, the Lady Dulcinea of Toboso, if all these vanquished by your grace are sent and will be sent to kneel before her? Because it might be that when they arrive, she's out raking flax or on the threshing floor, and they'll run away when they see her, and she'll laugh and get angry at the present. John Lovett's liar character is definitely based on. Oh, that's fun. I'm trying to think. Okay. I don't know if I know this character. I need to look into it. Clearly. Oh, John Lovitz. I have already told you many times before now, Sancho, said Don Quixote, that you talk far too much, and although your wits are dull, your tongue often is sharp. However, so that you may see how foolish you are and how discerning I am, I wish to tell you a brief story. I mean, it's probably not, but it seems to be. It seems like, even if it's unintentional, a lot of things are based on other things, if that makes sense. That was very vague, but you know what I mean? Like, this, I'm sure, spurred so many different things, and then it's just translated in a bunch of different ways, and then to the point where, like, we don't even know, like, the original, like, character or the original source material. So that lady you made up 6 months ago is secretly the lady we just started talking about. Yeah. It's fine. Once there was a widow who was beautiful, free, rich, and above all, easy in her ways, and she fell in love with a lay brother, a sturdy, good-looking boy, whose superior learned of this. And one day he said to the good widow, in fraternal reprimand, I am amazed, Senora, and with reason, that a woman as distinguished, as beautiful, and as rich as your grace has fallen in love with a man as crude, as base, and as stupid as he, when there are in this house so many masters, so many scholars, so many theologians, among whom your grace could make a selection as if you were choosing pears, saying, I want this one, but not the other. But she responded with a good deal of wit and verve. Your grace, Signor, is very much mistaken, and you are thinking in an old-fashioned way if you think I have chosen badly, no matter how stupid he may seem to you. Because, considering the reason I love and want him, he knows as much philosophy as Aristotle, and even more. In the same way, Sancho, because of my love for Dulcinea of Toboso, she is worth as much as the highest princess on earth. And yes, not every poet who praises a lady, calling her by another name, really has one. Do you think the... Oh man, there's a bunch of names that I don't know how to say. Amaryllis, Phyllis, Silvius, Diana's, Galatea's, Elitis, and all the rest that fill books, ballads, barber shops, and theaters are really ladies of flesh and blood who belong to those who celebrate them? No, of course not, for most are imagined in order to provide a subject for their verses, and so that people will think of them as lovers and as men who have the capacity to be lovers. And therefore it is enough for me to think and believe that my good Aldonzo Lorenzo is beautiful and virtuous. As for her lineage, it matters little, for no one is going to investigate it in order to give her a robe of office, and I can think she is the highest princess in the world. Because you should know, Sancho, if you do not know already, that two things inspire love more than any other. They are great beauty and a good name, and these two things reach their consummation in Dulcinea, for in beauty no one is her equal, and as for a good name, few can approach her. And to conclude, I imagine that everything I say is true, no more and no less, and I depict her in my imagination as I wish her to be in beauty and distinction, and Helen cannot approach her. Lucretia cannot match her, nor can any of the other famous women of past ages, Greek, barbarian, or Latin. Let each man say what he chooses. If, because of this, I am criticized by the ignorant, I shall not be chastised by the learned. Learned. I say that your grace is correct in everything, responded Sancho, and that I am an ass. But I don't know why my mouth says ass when you shouldn't mention rope in the hanged man's house. But let's have the letter, and I'll say goodbye and be on my way. Don Quixote took out the notebook and moved off to one side, and very calmly began to write the letter. And when he finished, he called Sancho and said he wanted to read it to him, so that Sancho could commit it to memory in the event he lost it along the way, for his own misfortune was such that it was reasonable to fear the worst. To which Sancho responded, Your Grace should write it 2 or 3 times in a book, and give it to me, and I'll take good care of it, because it's foolish to think I'll commit it to memory. Mine is so bad I often forget my own name. But even so, your Grace should read it to me, and I'll be very happy to hear it, for it must be perfect. You would have thought that having relatively few diseases and healthy teeth would have given pretty high... You would think so. Absolutely, especially in the 17th century. Like, ooh, not diseased, has all of their teeth? I'm sorry, what? Yeah, the farmer's daughter with all her teeth is a winner. But his name. Listen then, for this is what it says, said Don Quixote. Letter from Don Quixote to Dulcinea of Toboso. Supreme and most high lady, He who is sore wounded by the sharp blade of absence, he whose heartstrings are broken, most gentle Dulcinea of Toboso, sendeth thee wishes for the well-being he doth not have. If thy beauty scorneth me, if thy great merit opposeth me, if thy disdain standeth firm against me, e'en though I possess a goodly portion of forbearance, I shall be able to endure this affliction, which is both grievous and long-lasting. My good squire, Sancho, will recount the entire tale to thee, O ungrateful beauty, O my beloved enemy, regarding the state in which I findeth myself for thy sake. If it be thy desire to succour me, I am thine. If not, do as thou pleaseth, for by ending my life I shall be satisfied, both thy cruelty and mine own desire. Thine until death, the Knight of the Sorrowful Face. So that's a silly letter. I love the commitment to character. Um, but I don't think she knows that her name is Dulcinea, and I don't think that she's gonna know who the Knight of the Sorrowful Face is. I have notes. By my father's life, said Sancho when he heard the letter, that's the highest thing I've ever heard. Confound it. But how your grace says everything anyone could want, and how well the Knight of the Sorrowful Face fits into the closing. I'm telling the truth when I say your grace is the devil himself, and there's nothing your grace doesn't know. Everything is necessary, responded Don Quixote, for the profession I follow. Well then, said Sancho, your grace just has to make a note on the other page about the 3 donkeys and sign it very clearly so that when they see it they'll know the signature. It will be my pleasure, said Don Quixote. I'm sure he will come up with a tributary. Yes. Yes, I'm sure. I have no doubts. And when he had written it, he read it to Sancho, and it said, Señora, my niece, your grace will arrange, by means of this order for donkeys, the presentation to Sancho Panza, my squire, of 3 of the 5 said animals which I left behind, and which are in your grace's charge. These aforementioned 3 donkeys I hereby order immediately transferred as payment for others herewith received, which shall comprise, by this compensatory writ, full and complete payment thereof, duly executed in the heart of the Sierra Morena on the 22nd day of August of the current year. So I feel like his writing in these letters has the same feel of somebody trying to write a research paper and they need to flesh it out more. So they just throw in words and phrases and like mix up the phrases to make it longer because they have a word count that they have to get to. And this is gonna get them there. That's fine, said Sancho. Now your grace should sign it. It is not necessary to sign it, said Don Quixote. All I need do is add my mark and flourish, which is the same as a signature, and enough for 3 donkeys, and even for 300. I trust in your grace, responded Sancho. Let me go and saddle Rocinante, and let your grace get ready to leave me your blessing, for I plan to leave right away without seeing the crazy things your grace is going to do, though I'll say I saw you do more than anyone could wish. At least, Sancho, I want, because it is necessary, I say I want you to see me naked and performing 1 or 2 dozen mad acts, which will take me less than half an hour, because if you have seen them with your own eyes, you can safely swear to any others you might wish to add, and I assure you that you will not recount as many as I intend to perform. That is a great request. Yeah. Okay, before you leave and deliver these letters and get your donkeys, just watch me do some weird things naked and then tell everybody about it. Thank you. For the love of God, Senor, don't let me see your grace naked, for that will make me feel so bad. I won't be able to stop crying, and my head's in such a state after crying I did last night over my gray that I'm in no mood for any more tears. If it's your grace wish that I see some crazy actions, do them fully dressed, and let them be brief and to the point, especially because none of this is necessary for me, and like I said before, I want to shorten the time it takes me to get back here with the news your grace desires and deserves. Otherwise, let the Lady Dulcinea get ready, and if she doesn't answer the way she should, I make the solemn vow to God that I'll be a good answer out of her stomach if I have to kick her and slap her. Because how can anybody stand for a knight-errant as famous as your grace to go crazy without rhyme or reason for the sake of a... And don't let her make me say it, because by God, I'll tear everything apart and never look back. And I'm the one who can do it. She doesn't know me. By my faith, if she knew me, she'd think twice. If you want to act crazy, just please do it dressed. I love that. I've already cried enough because of the donkey. Just just please be weird with clothes on and make it brief, okay? Because I gotta go. I gotta go, dude. Well, Sancho, said Don Quixote, it seems you are no saner than I. I'm not as crazy, responded Sancho. I just have a more choleric nature. But, leaving that aside, what will your grace eat until I get back? Will you go out on the road like Cardenio and take food from the shepherds? Do not concern yourself with that, responded Don Quixote, because even if I had food, I would eat nothing but the plants and fruits that this meadow and these trees might offer me, for the elegance of my plan lies in not eating and in suffering other comparable hardships. Goodbye, then. But does your grace know what I'm afraid of? That I won't be able to find this place again? It's so out of the way. Take careful note of the landmarks, and I shall try not to leave the vicinity, said Don Quixote. And I shall even be sure to climb up to the highest peak to watch for your return. Better yet, so that you will not make a mistake and lose your way, you should cut some of the broom that grows in such abundance here, and place the stalks at intervals along the way until you reach level ground, and they will serve as markers and signs, as did the thread of Perseus in the labyrinth, so that you can find me when you return. And there is a note, and it says, after Perseus, in an apparent oversight, Cervantes wrote Perseus instead of Theseus. Cool. Yeah, I've had this exact conversation with my kids. Just please, just do it with your clothes on and make it quick. Oh my god. Oh, Star. Okay, fine, whatever. Just don't get any poop on it. It's okay. Oh man. I'll do that, responded Sancho Panza. And after cutting some stalks of broom, he asked for his master's blessing, and, not without many tears on both their parts, he took his leave. He mounted Rocinante, whom Don Quixote commended to his care, saying he should attend to him as to his own person, and he set out for the plain, scattering stalks of broom at intervals, as his master had advised. And so he left, although Don Quixote was still urging him to watch at least 2 mad acts. But he had not gone 100 paces when he turned and said, Señor, your grace is right, so that I can swear with a clear conscience that I saw you do crazy things. It would be a good idea for me to see at least one, even though I've already seen a pretty big one in your grace's staying here. Did I not tell you so? Said Don Quixote. Wait, Sancho, I shall do them before you can say a credo. And hastily he pulled off his breeches and was left wearing only his skin and shirt tails. And then, without further ado, he kicked his heels twice, turned 2 cartwheels with his head down and his feet in the air, and revealed certain things. Sancho, in order not to see them again, pulled on Rocinante's reins and turned him round, satisfied and convinced that he could swear his master had lost his mind. And so we shall let him go on his way until his return, which did not take long. End of chapter 25. They're gonna be split up. I love that the end of the chapter is like, yeah, they're leaving, but don't worry, they'll be back. They'll be back together. Oh, this is so great. And like, I don't understand why Don Quixote is like, well, let me do some crazy things. Like, the whole journey he's been on hasn't been crazy. Sancho has a lot of stories already to say. He doesn't need to say that you got naked and did cartwheels. Doesn't need to say that. And also, why? I don't understand. You want to, or Don Quixote, not you, sorry, apologies. Don Quixote wants to be like a famous knight so that he'll eventually be a king and marry a beautiful woman, a queen, and all of that stuff. He hasn't really won any battles. Not really. And he's like, let me do this crazy business. I don't understand. What kind of word are you trying to get around? He wants a legacy, but he also wants attention right now. Yeah. Okay. Fair. Fair. All right. Give them what the people want. I get it. It's a fast way to become infamous, yes. Absolutely. All right. See, the thing, I know we're definitely going to have time. The thing that I enjoy maybe most about digital books is that it tells you how long you have for the chapter. Whereas now it's like, I don't, no idea. It could take me 5 minutes, it could take me 30. No idea. But we're doing it. We're just going. We're going for it. He's more than famous. He's infamous. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Oh. Oh, Don Quixote. What silly business are we gonna do now? All right. Chapter 26. Here we go. In which the elegant deeds performed by an enamored Don Quixote in the Serena, in the Sierra Morena continue. I would love to have cartwheels added to my story. I get it. I get it. Returning to the account of what the Knight of the Sorrowful Face did after he found himself alone, the history relates that when Don Quixote, with his upper parts clothed and his bottom parts naked, finished his leaps and turns and saw that Sancho, not wishing to see more mad acts, had departed, he climbed to the top of a very high crag, and there he pondered what he had so pondered without ever reaching a decision, which was whether it would be better and more appropriate for him to imitate Roland in his excessive madness, or Amadis in his melancholy. And talking to himself, he said, if Roland was as good and valiant a knight as everyone says, why should anyone be surprised? After all, he was enchanted, and no one could kill him except by placing a pin in the bottom of his foot, and he always wore shoes, with 7 metal soles, although such stratagems did him little good against Bernardo del Carpio, who understood them, and crushed him with his arms at Roncesvalles. But, his valor aside, we come to the matter of his losing his mind, and it is certain that he lost it because of the signs in which fortune led him, and the news the shepherd gave him that Angelica had taken more than 2 siestas with Medoro, a little curly-haired Moor who was Agramante's page, And if he understood this to be true, and his lady had committed so great a wrong against him, he did not do much by going mad. But how can I imitate in his madness if I do not imitate him in its cause? Because I shall go so far as to swear that my Dulcinea of Toboso has not in all her days seen a single Moor just as he is in his clothing, and that she is today as she was on the day she was born, and it would be a grievous affront if I, imagining anything else about her, were to go mad with the type of madness that afflicted Roland in his fury. On the other hand, I see that Amadis of Gaul, without losing his mind and without performing mad acts, achieved as much fame as a lover as anyone else, because what he did, according to his history, was simply that, finding himself scorned by his lady Oriana, who had ordered him not to appear in her presence until she so willed it, he withdrew to the Peña Pobre in the company of a hermit, and there he had his fill of weeping and commending himself to God, until heaven hearkened to his pleas in the midst of the greatest travail and need. And if that is true, as it most certainly is, why should I now go to the trouble of tearing off all my clothes and causing grief to these trees, which have never done me any harm whatsoever? Nor do I have reason to muddy the clear waters of these streams, where I may drink whenever I wish. Long live the memory of Amadis, and let him be imitated in every way possible by Don Quixote of La Mancha, about whom it will be said, as it was said of the other, that if he did not achieve great things, he died in the effort to perform them. And if I am not scorned and disdained by Dulcinea of Toboso, it is enough, as I have said, to be absent from her. Well then, to work. Let the actions of Amadis come to mind and show me where I must begin to imitate them. I already know that for the most part he prayed and commended himself to God, but what shall I use for a rosary, since I do not have one? Then he thought of what he could do, and he tore a long strip from his shirt-tails, and tied 11 knots in it, one larger than the rest, and this served as his rosary during the time he was there, when he said 1,000,000 Ave Marias. There's a note, and it says, this phrase was considered irreverent, and in the second edition it was replaced by, and for a rosary he took some large galls from a cork tree, which he strung together and used as prayer beads. The little changes are so interesting, and some of them I don't understand why you would change it. Okay, here we go. He was greatly troubled at not finding a hermit nearby who would hear his confession and console him, and so he spent his time walking through the meadow, riding and scratching on the tree trunks, and in the fine sand many verses, all of them suited to his sorrow, and some of them praising Dulcinea. But the only ones that were found complete, and that could be read after they were discovered, were these. O trees, grasses, and plants, that in this spot do dwell, so verdant, tall, abundant, if you find no joy in my ill, then hear my honest complaints. Let not my grief alarm you, even when it brings dire fears, for to pay and recompense you, Don Quixote here shed tears for his absent Dulcinea of Toboso. Here in this place, this season, the truest, most faithful lover hides his face from his lady, and has been made to suffer untold torments without reason. Love buffets him about in merciless battle and quarrel, and so, till he filled a barrel, Don Quixote here shed tears for his absent Dulcinea of Toboso. Questing for high adventures among boulders and rocky tors, and cursing a heart made of stone, for in this wild desolation he finds naught but misadventures. Love lashed him with a cruel whip, not with a gentle cordon, And when it scourged his nape, Don Quixote here shed tears for his absent Dulcinea of Toboso. Cartwheeling old naked man is possible, but 1,000,000 Hail Marys is, it's too much. I just don't believe it. A cause of no small laughter in those who discovered these verses was of Toboso, appended to the name of Dulcinea, because they imagined that Don Quixote must have imagined that if, when he named Dulcinea, he did not also say of Toboso, the stanza would not be understood, and this, in fact, was true, as he later confessed. He wrote many other stanzas, but, as we have said, no more than these three could be read in their entirety. He spent this time writing, sighing, and calling on the fauns and satyrs of the woods, and the nymphs of the river, and on grieving, tearful echo to answer and console and hear him. He also searched for plants that would sustain him until Sancho returned. And if the squire had taken 3 weeks instead of 3 days, the knight of the sorrowful face would have been so altered that not even his own mother would have known him. I am wondering how far they actually traveled. Because, yes, they have slept in an inn and outdoors and stuff like that, but I also feel like they're traveling just super slowly. Just thoughts, just questions that I have. It would be a good idea to leave him enveloped in sighs and verses, and to recount what befell Sancho Panza as he traveled on his mission. When he came out into the king's highway, he began to look for the road to Toboso, and the next day he reached the inn where he had suffered the misfortune of the blanket. And no sooner had he seen it than it seemed to him that once again he was flying through the air, and he did not want to go inside even though he had arrived at an hour when he could and should have done so, since it was time to eat, and he longed to enjoy something hot, because for many days he had eaten nothing but cold food. He does have to stop every few feet to pick up teeth. It will definitely slow somebody down. Absolutely. You're right. You're right. Excuse me. This necessity drove him to approach the inn, still doubtful as to whether he should go in or not. And while he was hesitating, 2 people came out of the inn and recognized him immediately. And one said to the other, "Tell me, Señor licentiate, that man on the horse, isn't he Sancho Panza, the one our adventurer's housekeeper said had left with her master to be his squire?" "It is," said the licentiate, "and that's the horse of our Don Quixote." And they knew him so well because they were the priest and barber of his village, and the ones who had held a public proceeding and scrutinized the books. As soon as they recognized Sancho Panza and Rocinante, they wished to have news of Don Quixote, and they approached, and the priest called him by name. So they really are not that far. Because these are the 2 people, the barber and the priest, who were burning the books at Don Quixote's house. They're not far away at all. That's great. Okay, let's see. "Friend Sancho Panza, where is your master?" Sancho Panza knew who they were, and decided to hide the place and condition in which he had left his master, and so he replied that his master was busy somewhere, with something that was very important to him, but by the eyes in his head he could not reveal what it was. "No, no, Sancho Panza," said the barber. "If you don't tell us where he is, we'll think, and we already do think, that you killed and robbed him, since you're hiding his horse. Since you're riding his horse. As a matter of fact, you'd better tell us where the horse's owner is, or you'll regret it." "There's no reason to threaten me. I'm not the kind of man who robs or kills anybody. Let each man be killed by fate, or by God who made him. My master is doing penance in the middle of those mountains, as happy as can be. And then, in a rush and without stopping, he told them of the state in which he had left him, and the adventures that had befallen him, and how he was carrying a letter to the lady Dulcinea of Toboso, who was the daughter of Lorenzo, and the one with whom his master was head over heels in love. There probably is. I'm wondering if there's one maybe in the back of this book. Although this book doesn't have pictures, so probably not. No. No, it does not. But there has to be, right? I'm sure there's a map somewhere. They were both astonished at what Sancho Panza told them, and although they already knew of the madness of Don Quixote and knew what kind of madness it was, whenever they heard about it, they were astonished all over again. They asked Sancho Panza to show them the letter he was carrying to the lady Dulcinea of Toboso. He said it was written in a notebook, and his master had ordered him to have it copied onto paper in the first town he came to. The priest replied that he should show it to him, and he would copy it in a very fine hand. Sancho Panza put his hand in the bosom of his shirt, looking for the notebook, but he did not find it. I would not have found it if it had looked for it from then until now, because Don Quixote had kept it, and had not given it to him, and he had not remembered to ask for it. Hey, Atkinson! Oh, I'm loving it so far. This is a first read for me. I'm super, super enjoying it. Glad you're here. Enjoy your lurk. When Sancho saw that he could not find the book, his face turned deathly pale, and quickly patting down his entire body again, he saw again that he could not find it, and without further ado he put both hands to his beard and tore out half of it, and then, very quickly, and without stopping, he punched himself half a dozen times on the face and nose until they were bathed in blood, seeing which, the priest and the barber asked him what had happened to drive him to such lengths. It is so good. I heard that it was funny, but I didn't fully understand that it was funny. I'm I don't know. Like older funny things just don't really translate well. Like I've read, oh, what is it called? I can't think of the name. I don't know. But that was also supposed to be like I've read older books that are also supposed to be funny and just didn't find them funny. But this one, so good. Oh, Star, thank you so much. Yes, I will absolutely be looking at that. Thank you, thank you. What else could have happened? Responded Sancho, except that from one moment to the next, in an instant, I've lost 3 donkeys, each one as sturdy as a castle. How did that happen? Replied the barber. I've lost the notebook, responded Sancho, that had the letter to Dulcinea and a document signed by her uncle that told his niece to give me 3 of the 4 or 5 donkeys he has at home. And he recounted the loss of the grey. The priest consoled him, and told him that when they found his master, he would revalidate the order and write the transfer out on paper, as was the usual custom, since the ones written in notebooks were never accepted or executed. This comforted Sancho, and he said that if this were true, he did not feel too bad about losing the letter to Dulcinea, because he knew it almost by heart, and it would be copied wherever and whenever they wished. I know. It's so great. I love when he talks to other people like he is a royal knight, and it's just so good. You can tell that he's not a real royal knight and is just trying so, so hard. I love it. This comforted Sancho, and he said that if this was true, he did not feel too bad about losing the letter to Dulcinea because he knew it almost by heart, and it could be copied wherever and whenever they wished. Then tell it to us, Sancho, said the barber, and we'll copy it later. Sancho Panza stopped and scratched his head to bring the letter to mind, and he stood now on one foot, now on the other. Sometimes he looked at the ground, sometimes at the sky, and after a very long while, when he gnawed off half a fingertip, keeping those who were waiting for him to speak in suspense, he said, I accidentally read a word, like a couple words ahead, and it's great. By God, Senor Lechensate, may the devil carry away what I remember of the letter. But at the beginning, it did say, high and sullied lady. It definitely did not say that. I'm gonna go back and find the letter to see like what it actually said. Hold on. Okay, it starts with supreme and most high lady. This is great. It wouldn't, said the barber, say sullied, but supreme or sovereign lady. Oh, that's right, said Sancho. Then, as I recall, it went on to say, as I recall, this ignorant and sleepless and sore-wounded man kisses the hands of your grace, ungrateful and unrecognized beauty. And then something about health and sickness that he was sending her, and then it went along until it ended with thine until death, the knight of the sorrowful face. Oh, he definitely gets a supreme voice. They both derived no small pleasure from Sancho Panza's good memory, and they praised him for it, and asked him to repeat the letter 2 more times so that they too could commit it to memory and copy it at the proper time. Sancho repeated it 3 more times, and each time he said another 3,000 pieces of nonsense. Following this, he recounted other things that had happened to his master, but did not say a word about being tossed in a blanket in that same inn which he refused to enter. He also told them how his master, if he brought back a favorable reply promptly from the lady Dulcinea of Toboso, would set out to try to become an emperor, or at least a monarch. That's what the two of them had agreed to, and it was an easy thing for the master to do, given the valor of his person and the strength of his arm. When he had done this, his master would arrange for him to marry, because by then he could not be anything but a widower, and Don Quixote would give him, as his wife, one of the ladies in waiting to the empress, and she would inherit a rich, large estate on terra firma, without any insulars or insulas, because he didn't want them anymore. Sancho said this with so much serenity, wiping his nose from time to time, and so little rationality, that the two men were astonished again as they considered how powerful the madness of Don Quixote was, for it had pulled along after it the good sense of this poor man. They did not want to make the effort to disabuse him of the error in which he found himself, for it seemed to them that since it was not injurious to his conscience, it would be better to leave him where he was, so that they would have the pleasure of hearing his foolishness. And so they told him to pray to God for the well-being of his master, for it was possible, and even probable, that with the passage of time he would become an emperor, as he said, or an archbishop, at the very least, or some other equivalent high office, to which Sancho replied, Señores, if fortune turns her wheel so that my master decides not to be an emperor, but an archbishop, I'd like to know now, what do archbishops errant usually give their squires? Usually, responded the priest, they give some benefice, a simple one or a parish, or they make him a sacristan with a very nice fixed income, in addition to other fees that bring in more income. For that it would be necessary, replied Sancho, for the squire not to be married, and to know at least how to assist at mass, and if that's true, then woe is me, for I'm married, and don't know the first letter of the alphabet, What will happen to me if my master decides to be an archbishop and not an emperor, which is the usage and custom of knights-errant?" "Don't worry, friend Sancho," said the barber, "for we'll ask your master and advise him, and even present it to him as a matter of conscience, that he should become an emperor and not an archbishop, which will be easier for him since he's more soldier than student." "That's what I think, too," said Sancho, "though I can say that he has a talent for everything. What I plan to do, for my part, is pray to our Lord to put him in the place that's best for him, and where he can do the most favors for me." That's great. "You speak with good judgment," said the priest, "and will act like a good Christian. But what has to be done now is to arrange to remove your master from that useless penance in which you say he is engaged. In order to think of the best way to do that is to eat something. Since it's time for supper, it would be a good idea for us to go into this inn." Sancho said that they should go in and he would wait for them outside, and later he would tell them the reason he wasn't going in and why it wouldn't be a good idea if he did. But he asked them to bring out something hot for him to eat, as well as barley for Rocinante. They went inside and left him alone, and a short while later the barber brought him some food. Then, when they had thought carefully about how they would accomplish what they desired, the priest had an idea that would appeal to Don Quixote and achieve what they wanted. He told the barber that what he had thought was that he would dress in the clothes of a wandering maiden, and the barber would look as much like a squire as possible, and they would go to the place where Don Quixote was doing penance, the maiden pretending to be an afflicted damsel in distress, who would ask a boon, which, as a valiant knight-errant, he would not fail to grant, and the boon, which would be to follow her wherever she might lead, to undo a great wrong that an evil knight had done to her. And she would implore him as well not to request that she remove her mask, or ask any other questions regarding her estate and fortune until such time as he had righted the injustice so wrongly done unto her by that base knight. The priest believed beyond any doubt that Don Quixote would comply with everything asked of him in those terms, and in this manner they would take him from that place and bring him home to his village, where they would try to see if there was a cure for his strange madness. End of chapter 26. So sillies. And again, just like the gentle reminder in this world, like, yeah, this is not normal. What Don Quixote is doing is not normal in this world, which is a fun reminder. Okay. Okay. Chapter 27. Refill the tank. Okay, chapter 27. Concerning how the priest and the barber carried out their plan, along with other matters worthy of being recounted in this great history. The barber did not think the priest's invention was a bad idea. In fact, it seemed so good that they immediately began to put it into effect. They asked the innkeeper's wife for a skirt and bonnet, giving her a security one of the priest's new cassocks. The barber made a long beard out of a gray or red oxtail where the innkeeper hung his comb. The innkeeper's wife asked why they wanted those things. The priest told her briefly about Don Quixote's madness, and how the disguises were just the thing to get him out of the mountains, which is where he was now. Then the innkeeper and his wife realized that the madman had been their guest, the one who made the balm, and was the master of the squire who had been tossed in the blanket, and they recounted to the priest everything that had happened, not keeping silent about the things Sancho had kept so secret. In short, the innkeeper's wife outfitted the priest in the most remarkable fashion. She dressed him in a woolen skirt with black velvet stripes a handspan wide, and all of them slashed, and a bodice of green velvet adorned with white satin binding, and both the bodice and the skirt must have been made in the days of King Wamba. And there's a note after King Wamba, and it says, a Visigoth who ruled Spain in the 7th century. And it says 672 to 680. The priest did not permit his head to be adorned, but he did put on a cap of quilted linen that he wore to sleep at night, and tied it around the front with a band of black taffeta, and with another band he fashioned a mask that covered his beard and face very well. He pulled his broad-brimmed hat down tightly on his head, and it was so large he could have used it as a parasol. He wrapped himself in his cape and mounted his mule's side saddle. The barber, with a beard somewhere between red and white that hung down to his waist, had been made, as he had said, from the tail of a reddish ox, mounted his mule as well. They said goodbye to everyone, including the good Maritornes, who promised to say a rosary, although a sinner, and asked God to grant them success in so arduous and Christian an enterprise as the one they had undertaken. But as soon as he had ridden out of the inn, it occurred to the priest that he was committing an error by dressing in that manner, for it was an incident thing for a member of the clergy to do, no matter how important the end. He told this to the barber, and asked him to trade clothes with him, since it would be better if the barber was the damsel in distress, and the priest played the part of the squire. In this way his office would be less profaned. But if the barber did not want to make the change, he had decided to go no further, even if the devil made off with Don Quixote. At this point Sancho approached, and when he saw the two of them in these clothes, he could not control his laughter. The barber, in fact, agreed to everything the priest said, and as they traded disguises, the priest informed him how he should behave and the words he had to say to Don Quixote in order to move and oblige him to go away and with him and leave the place he had chosen for his useless penance. The barber responded that he had no need of instruction and would do everything perfectly. He did not want to put on his disguise until they were near the place where they would find Don Quixote, and so he folded the garments, and the priest adjusted the beard, and they continued their journey, led by Sancho Panza, who recounted what had happened with the madman who had come across the Sierra, although he did hide the discovery of the traveling case and everything that was in it, for although he was a fool, the squire was somewhat greedy. On the following day, they reached the place where Sancho had... Gosh, what did he do? Made the trail of broom so that he could find the spot where he had left his master. And when he saw this, he said that this was the way into the mountains, and they ought to put on their disguises if that was needed to achieve his master's freedom. They had told him earlier that doing what they were doing and dressing in that fashion were crucial to freeing his master from the injudicious life, he had chosen, and they had charged him repeatedly that he was not to tell his master who they were, or that he knew them. If his master asked, as he was bound to ask, if he had given the letter to Dulcinea, he was to say yes, and because he did not know how to read, she had spoken her reply, saying that she ordered him, under pain of her displeasure, to come to see her immediately, and it was very important because with this, and what they intended to say to him, they were certain they could turn him to a better life and set him on the road to become an emperor or a monarch. As for becoming an archbishop, there was no reason to worry about that. Sancho listened to everything, and noted it carefully in his mind, and thanked them profusely for their intention to advise his master to be an emperor, and not an archbishop, because in his opinion, as far as granting favors to their squires was concerned, emperors could do more than archbishops errant. He also said it would be a good idea if he went first and found his master, and told him his lady's reply, for that would probably be enough to make him leave the place, saving them a good deal of trouble. What Sancho said seemed reasonable, and they decided to wait until he came back with the news that he had found his master. Sancho entered the ravines of the Sierra, leaving the priest and the barber in one where a small, gentle stream ran in the cool, pleasant shade cast by other rocky crags, and the trees grew all around. They had come there on a day in August, and the heat was intense, particularly in that area. The time was 3 in the afternoon, making the spot even more pleasant, and inviting them to wait until Sancho returned, which is what they did. When the two men were resting in the shade, a voice unaccompanied by the music of any other instrument reached their ears, and it sounded so sweet and delicate that they were more than a little taken aback, for the place did not seem the kind where there would be anyone who could sing so well, although it is often said that in the forests and fields one can find shepherds with extremely fine voices. These are more the exaggerations of poets than the truth. They were especially surprised when they realized that they were hearing the verses. Dottie! Hello! Good to see you. Thank you so much for the follow. Hello! They were especially surprised when they realized that they were hearing the verses not of rustic shepherds, but of learned courtiers, and in confirmation of the truth, these were the verses they heard. Who makes all my joy to wane, disdain, and who prolongs this misery, jealousy, and who assails and tears my patience, absence, and therefore, in my deep felt sorrow, I see no cure on the morrow, for I am killed by hope in vain, absence, jealousy, and disdain. Oh my gosh, you don't need to apologize. Absolutely not. Who causes me to sigh and grieve, love, and who deems glories not my portion, fortune, and who augments my grief by 7, heaven, and therefore, in profound unease, I fear I'll die of this disease, for my enemies, I can prove, are heaven, fortune, and love. Who then will improve my fate, death, and who in love claims victory, perfidy, and who can make its ills grow less, madness, and therefore it's no act of reason to attempt to cure this passion, when the remedies, in truth, are madness, perfidy, and death. The hour, the weather, the solitude, the voice, and the skill of the one who was singing caused both wonder and pleasure in the two who were listening, and they remained quiet, hoping they would hear more. But seeing that the silence lasted for some time, they resolved to look for the musician who sang with so beautiful a voice. And as they were about to do so, the same voice kept them from moving, for again it reached their ears, singing this sonnet. Most sacred friendship, who, with rapid wings, while your mere semblance stayed here on the ground, flew full of joy up to the vaults of heaven to mingle with the blessed in paradise, and there on high you show us, when you wish, fair harmony concealed behind a veil, through which at times there gleams a fervent zeal to do good works that ne'er yield aught but ill. Leave heaven, friendship, or no more allow deceit to don the livery of your house, and use it to destroy in earnest will. If you take not your semblance from deceit, the world will soon return to its first strife, the chaos and dark disquiet of discord. The song ended with a profound sigh, and the two men waited, again, listening attentively for more singing, but seeing that the music had turned to sobs and pitiful laments, they decided to learn who the aggrieved person was who sang so beautifully and wept so mournfully. Before they had gone very far, they walked behind a rocky crag, and saw a man whose figure and appearance were the same as those described by Sancho Panza, who had told them the story of Cardenio, and this man, when he saw them, did not become agitated, but remained motionless, his head lowered as if he were lost in thought, and he did not raise his eyes again to look at them until the first glance, when they had appeared so unexpectedly. The priest, who was a well-spoken man and already knew the Cardenio's misfortune, for he had recognized who he was, approached him, and in brief though very perceptive words implored and exhorted him to believe the wretched life he was pursuing there, or else he might lose his life, which would be the greatest of all misfortunes. At that moment Cardenio was completely rational, free of the fits of madness that so often drove him to fury, and when he saw them dressed in clothing so different from that worn by the men who wandered those desolate places, he could not help but be astonished, especially when he heard his affairs discussed as if they were common knowledge, for the words the priest said led him to this conclusion, and he responded in this manner: "I see clearly, señores, whoever you may be, that heaven, watching over the good and even the bad very often, through no merit of my own, has sent me in this solitary place so far removed from ordinary human commerce, persons who have set before me, with vivid and varied reasons, how lacking in reason I am to live the life I lead, and how attempted to turn me away from this life and toward a better one. But since you do not know that I know, that if I leave this evil I fall under another, even greater, perhaps you consider me a man whose power of reasoning is weak and, even worse, one who has no judgment at all. It would not be surprising if that were the case, because it is evident to me that in my imagination the power of my afflictions is so intense and contributes so much to my ruination that I am powerless to prevent it, and I become like a stone, bereft of all sense and awareness. I become conscious of this truth only when people tell me and show me the evidence of the things I have done while that terrible attack has control over me, and all I can do is lament my fate in vain, and curse it to no avail, and offer, as an excuse for my mad acts, the recounting of their cause to all who wish to hear it. For if rational men see the cause, they will not be surprised by the effects, and if they cannot help me, at least they will not blame me, and anger at my outbursts will be transformed into pity for my misfortunes. If you, señores, have come from the same intention that has brought others here, before you go any further in your wise arguments, I ask you to hear the as yet unfinished account of my tribulations, because perhaps when you have, you will spare yourselves the trouble of offering consolation for an affliction that is inconsolable. No, like, what an introduction. No, hello, hi, how's it going? The weather is fine today. Just immediately going into your tribulations and why you're there. It's wild to me. Wild to me. But tell me how you're really feeling. The two men, who wanted nothing else but to hear from Cardenio's own lips the reason for his ills, asked that he tell it to them, and said they would do only what he wished, either to help or to console him. Then the aggrieved gentleman began his pitiful history with almost the same words and phrases he had used to relate it to Don Quixote and the goatherd a few days earlier, when, as this history has recounted, because of Master Elizabeth and Don Quixote's punctilious defense of chivalric decorum, the tale was not concluded. But now, it was their good fortune that the attack of madness was over, giving Cardenio an opportunity to narrate his tale to the end, and so, when he came to the letter of Don Fernando had found in the volume of Amadis, Cardenio said he knew it by heart, and what it said was this: Lucinda to Cardenio. Each day I discover in you virtues that oblige and compel me to value even more, and therefore, if you wished to free me from this debt without attaching my honor, you could do so very easily. I have a father who knows you and loves me, and he, without forcing my will, can meet the obligation of what it is responsible for you to have. If in that, if in fact you value me as you say, and as I believe you do. This letter moved me to ask for Lucinda's hand. As I have told you, it was the reason Don Fernando considered Lucinda to be the one of the most intelligent and prudent women of her time. This letter was the one that filled him with the desire to destroy me before my own desires could be realized. I told Don Fernando what Lucinda's father had said about my father's asking for her hand, which I did not dare mention to my father for fear he would not agree, not because he did not know Lucinda's quality, worth, virtue, and beauty, or that she possessed more than enough excellent traits to ennoble any family in Spain, but because I am understood that he did not wish me to marry until he knew what Duke Ricardo had planned for me. In short, I told him I had not risked speaking to my father, for this reason and many others that made me fearful, although I did not know precisely what they were, except that it seemed to me that what I desired would never become a reality. To all of this Don Fernando replied that he would assume the responsibility of speaking to my father, and persuading him to speak to Lucinda's father. O ambitious Marius, O cruel Catalina, O wicked Sulla, O lying Galalon, O traitorous Velido, O vengeful Julian, O greedy Judas, traitorous, cruel, vengeful, and lying man, what disservice had been done to you by this wretch who so openly revealed to you the secrets and joys of his heart? How did I offend you? What words did I say, and what advice did I give that was not intended to increase your honor or your advantage? But woe is me! Why do I complain? Everyone knows that when misfortunes are brought from the course of the stars, hurtling down from on high with fury and violence, no power on earth can stop them, no human effort can prevent them. Who could imagine that Don Fernando, an illustrious and intelligent nobleman under obligation to me for my services, and able to attain whatever his amorous desire might demand, no matter where it turned, would, as they say, bother to burden his conscience by taking from me my only sheep, one that I did not yet possess? But let us put such considerations aside, for they are futile and unprofitable, and take up again the broken thread of my misfortune, my unfortunate history. I shall tell you then that Don Fernando thought my presence would be troublesome to him when he put his false and evil idea into effect, and he resolved to send me to his older brother with a request for money to pay for 6 horses, which he intentionally bought for the sole purpose of having me leave, in order to achieve more easily his reprehensible purpose. And on the same day that he offered to speak to my father, he asked me to go for the money. Could I foresee this betrayal? Could I, by some chance, even imagine it? No, of course not. Instead, with great pleasure, I offered to leave immediately, gratified at the good purchase he had made. That night I spoke to Lucinda, and told her what I had arranged with Don Fernando, and said she should be confident with our virtuous and honest desires would be realized. She, as unaware as I of Don Fernando's perfidy, told me to try to return home quickly, because she believed that the fulfillment of our desires would take no longer than the time it took for my father to speak to her father. I do not know why, but after she said this her eyes filled with tears, and the lump in her throat kept her from speaking another word of the many that, it seemed to me, she was attempting to say. I was taken aback by this uncommon emotion, which I had not seen in her before, because whenever we spoke, on the occasion when good fortune and my diligence permitted it, it was with joy and gladness, and our conversations were not mixed with tears, sighs, jealousies, suspicions, or fears. I would exalt my happiness, because heaven had granted me Lucinda as my lady. I exaggerated her beauty and marveled at her virtue and understanding. She returned the favor, praising in me those things that she, as a woman in love, found worthy of praise. We would tell each other 1,000 trifles, things that had happened to our neighbors and friends, and the limit of my boldness was to grasp, almost by force, one of her beautiful white hands and raise it to my lips, or as far as the constraints of the grating that divided us would allow. But on the night that preceded the sad day of my departure, she wept, moaned, sighed, and then withdrew, leaving me full of confusion and alarm, apprehensive at having seen such new and melancholy signs of Lucinda's sorrow and grief in order to deny my hopes. I attributed everything to the strength of the love she had for me, and the sadness that absence usually causes in those who truly love each other. In short, I set out sad and pensive, my soul filled with imaginings and suspicions. Not knowing what I suspected or imagined, these were clear signs of the sad, grievous event that lay ahead of me. I reached my destination and gave the letters to Don Fernando's brother. I was well received, but not well dismissed, because much to my displeasure he told me to wait for a week in a place where his father, the Duke, would not see me, because Don Fernando had asked that he send back with me a certain sum of money. Without his father's knowledge, all of this was an invention of the false Don Fernando, for his brother had enough money to allow me to leave without delay. This was an order and command that I was inclined to disobey, because it seemed impossible to endure so many days away from Lucinda, especially since I had left her filled with the sadness I have recounted to you. Yet I obeyed, like a good servant, even though I saw that it would be at the cost of my well-being. But 4 days after my arrival, a man came looking for me with a letter, which he gave to me, and by the address I knew it was from Lucinda, because the writing was hers. I opened it, fearful and apprehensive, believing that something very important had moved her to write to me when I was far away, for when I was near she did so very rarely. I asked the man, before I read it, who had given it to him and how long the journey had taken. He said that he happened to be walking down a street in the city at noon, and a very beautiful lady called to him from a window, her eyes filled with tears, and said to him very urgently, "Brother, if you are a Christian, as you seem to be, for the love of God I beg you to take this letter as quickly as you can to the place and person written here in the address. For both of them are well known, and by doing this you will do a great service to our Lord, and so that you can arrive some advantage from this, take what is in this handkerchief." And then the man said, "She threw down from the window a knotted handkerchief that contained 100 reales, and this gold ring, and the letter that I've given you. And without waiting for my reply, she left the window, though first she saw me take the letter and handkerchief, and signaled to her that I would do so, as she had asked. And so, seeing myself so well paid for the difficulty I might have in bringing it to you, and knowing by the address that you were the person for whom it intended, because, Signor, I know very well who you are, and being obliged as well by the tears of that beautiful lady, I decided not to trust anyone else, and came myself to hand it to you. And I have been traveling for the 16 hours since it was given to me, and as you know, the distance is 18 leagues." While the grateful and novel courier was saying this to me, I hung on his every word, my legs trembling so much I could barely stand. And then I opened the letter and saw that it contained these words: "Don Fernando's promise to you that he would speak to your father about speaking to mine has been carried out more to his pleasure than to your benefit. Know then, Signor, that he has asked for my hand in marriage, and my father, carried away by the advantage he thinks Don Fernando has over you, has agreed to everything he wishes, and, with so much enthusiasm that in 2 days' time the betrothal will take place, so secretly and so privately that the only witnesses will be heaven and a few of our servants. Imagine the state I am in. If you come, you will see it, and you will know, in the outcome of this business, whether or not I love you dearly. May it please God that this reaches your hands before my hand finds itself joined with that of one who does not know how to keep the faith he promises." These, in short, were the words the letter contained, which made me set out immediately, not waiting for any other reply or any other money, for I realized very clearly then that it was the purchase not of horses, but of his own pleasure that had moved Don Fernando to send me to his brother. The anger I felt toward Don Fernando, together with my fear of losing the treasure I had earned with so many years of service and devotion, gave me wings. For almost as if I had flown, by the next day I reached my city at precisely the right time to go and speak with Lucinda. I entered in secret, having left my mule at the house of the good man who had brought me the letter, and as luck would have it, I was fortunate enough to find Lucinda at the grading that had been witness to our love. Lucinda knew me immediately, and I knew her, but not as she should have known me, and I her. But who in the world can boast that he has penetrated and understood the confused thought and mutable condition of a woman? No one, certainly. I tell you, then, that as soon as Lucinda saw me, she said, "Cardenio, I am dressed for the wedding. The traitorous Don Fernando and my avaricious father are waiting for me in the drawing-room, along with other witnesses who will see my death rather than my marriage. Do not be perturbed, dear friend, but try to be present at this sacrifice, which, since it could not be prevented by my words, my hidden dagger, which could deter even more determined forces, will put an end to my life and a beginning to your knowledge of the love I have and still have for you." I responded urgently, and in my great agitation, fearful I would not have enough time to answer her. "May your deeds, Signora, confirm the truth of your words. If you carry a dagger as proof of your sincerity, I am carrying a sword in which to defend you or kill myself, if our luck is unfavorable." I do not believe she could hear everything I said, because I heard them calling to her with some urgency, for the bridegroom was waiting. With this the night of my sorrow closed over me, and the sun of my joy set. I was left with no light in my eyes, and no power of reason in my understanding. I could not find the way into her house. I could not even move, but considering how important my presence was to whatever might occur, I did the best I could to rouse myself, and I walked into her house. Since I knew all its entrances and exits very well, and especially because of the secret tumult that reigned there, no one saw me. Unseen, I was able to hide in the alcove of a window in the drawing-room, concealed by two tapestries hanging next to each other, and looking between them. Unseen, I could see everything that happened in the drawing-room. How can I tell you now about the pounding of my heart as I stood there, or the thoughts that occurred to me, or the deliberations I made? For there were so many, and were of such a nature that they cannot and should not be told. It is enough for you to know that the bridegroom entered the drawing-room unadorned, wearing the ordinary clothes he usually wore. As best man, he had one of Lucinda's first cousins, and in the entire drawing-room there was no outsider, but only the servants of the house. A short while later, Lucinda emerged from her antechamber, accompanied by her mother and two of her ladies' maids, and she was dressed and adorned as handsomely as her rank and beauty deserved, the very perfection of courtly elegance and charm. My uncertainty and profession did not permit me to observe and notice the particulars of what she was wearing. I could see only the colors, which were scarlet and white, and the brilliance of the gems and jewels on her headdress, and all over her costume, all of it surpassed by the singular beauty of her lovely blonde tresses, which, in comparison to the precious stones and the light from the four flambeaux in the drawing-room, offered greater brilliance to the eye. O memory, mortal enemy of my repose, what is the good of picturing for me now the incomparable beauty of my adorned enemy? Would it not be better, cruel memory, if you recalled and pictured for me what she did then, so that I, moved by so manifest a wrong, can attempt, if not to avenge it, at least to lose my own life? Do not be vexed, Signores, at hearing these digressions of mine, for my grief is not the kind that can or should be recounted succinctly, and in passing, for each of its circumstances seemed to me worthy of a long discourse. To which the priest responded that not only were they not vexed at listening to him, they were pleased by the details he recounted, for they were of the sort that should not be passed over in silence, and deserved the same attention as the principal part of the story. "Well then," Cardenio continued, Then we were all in the drawing room. The parish priest came in and took both of them by the hand in order to do what the ceremony requires. And when he said, "Do you, Senora Lucinda, take Senor Don Fernando, here present, to be your lawful wedded husband, as decreed by Holy Mother Church?" I extended my head and neck between the two tapestries, and with attentive ears and my soul in distress, I listened for Lucinda's response, expecting her reply to be either a sentence of death or the affirmation of my life. Oh, if only I had dared to come out then and shout, "Lucinda! Lucinda, think of what you are doing. Consider what you owe me. Remember that you are mine and cannot belong to another. Realize that your saying yes and the end of my life are all one. Ah, you traitor Don Fernando, thief of my glory, death of my life, what do you want? What are you seeking? Consider that a Christian you cannot attain the object of your desires because Lucinda is my wife and I am her husband." Ah, madman that I am. Now that I am absent and far from danger, I say I should have done what I did not do. Now that I have allowed the theft of my most precious jewel, I curse the thief upon whom I could have wreaked my vengeance if I would have had as much courage for that as I do for my laments. In short, I am a coward and a fool then, and it is no surprise that I am dying now, ashamed, repentant, and mad. The priest was waiting for Lucinda's reply, and she took a long time to give it, and when I thought she would take out the dagger to prove her sincerity, or would loosen her tongue to utter a truth or reproach that would rebound to my benefit, I heard her say in a weak, faint voice, "Yes, I do." And Don Fernando said the same, and gave her the ring, and they were joined in an indissoluble bond. The groom moved to embrace his bride, and she, placing her hand over her heart, fainted into her mother's arms. All that remains now is to tell you the state I was in when I saw, in the sound of her yes, the mockery of my hopes, the falsity of Lucinda's words and promises, and the impossibility of ever retrieving the treasure I had lost at that instant. I was left with nothing, abandoned, it seemed to me, by all the heaven, the enemy of the earth that sustained me. Air denied me breath for my sighs, water denied its humor for my eyes, only fire grew stronger, so that my entire being burned with rage and jealousy. Everyone became agitated at Lucinda's swoon, and when her mother loosened her bodice to give her air, a sealed letter was discovered, which Don Fernando immediately took and began to read in the light of one of the flambeaux, when he finished reading it, he sat on a chair and rested his cheek in his hand, like a man lost in thought, and took no part in the remedies administered to his wife to help her recover. Seeing the agitation of everyone in the house, I dared not come, regardless of whether anyone saw me or not, resolved that if I were seen, I would do something so rash that everyone would understand the righteous determination in my heart to punish the false Don Fernando and even the fickle, swooning traitor. But my fate, which must be saving me for even greater ills, if there can possibly be any, decreed that I would have a surfeit at that moment of the reason I have been lacking ever since, and so, not wishing to take revenge on my greatest enemies, which, since I was so far from their mind, would have been an easy thing to do, I decided to turn my hand and inflict on myself the punishment they deserved, perhaps with even greater severity than I had killed them then and there, for if death is sudden, the punishment is soon over, but death that is extended by torture goes on killing, but does not end life. In short, I departed that house and went to the one where I had left my mule. I had it saddled, and without saying goodbye to anyone, I mounted and left the city, not daring, like a second Lot, to look back. When I found myself alone in the countryside, and the darkness of the night covered me, and its silence invited my lamentations, with no misgiving or fear that I would be heard or recognized, I freed my voice and liberated my tongue and hurled curses at Lucinda and Don Fernando, as if they would avenge the wrong they had done me. I called her cruel, ungrateful, false, thankless, and above all, greedy, for my enemy's wealth had closed on her closed the eyes on her love, taking it from me and giving it to one with whom fortune had been more generous and munificent. In the midst of this rush of curses and vituperations, I excused her, saying it was no surprise that a young girl, cloistered in the house of her parents, accustomed and trained to always obey them, would have wanted to accede to their wishes, since they were giving her as a husband a nobleman who was so distinguished, so wealthy, and so gallant that if she refused, it might be thought that she had no judgment, or that her desire lay elsewhere, something that would do grave harm to her good name and reputation. Then I said the opposite. If she had said I was her husband, they would have seen that in choosing me she had not made so bad a choice, that they could not forgive her. Before Don Fernando presented himself to them, they could not, if they kept their desires within reason, have wished for a better man than I to be their daughter's husband, and she, before placing herself in the critical position of being compelled to give her hand, could very well have said that I had already pledged her mine, and in that case I would have come forth and agreed to any tale she might have invented. In short, I decided that too little love, too little judgment, too much ambition, and too much desire for wealth had made her forget the words with which she had deceived, encouraged, and sustained me in my firm hopes and virtuous desires. With these arguments and this disquiet I travelled the rest of the night, and at dawn I came upon a way into these mountains, where I rode for another 3 days, with no direction or goal of any kind, until I reached some meadows, though I do not know on which side of the mountains they may be, and there I asked some drovers where I could find the harshest terrain in the Sierra. They told me it lay in this direction. I travelled here, intending to end my life, and as I was entering these desolate places my mule collapsed, dead of exhaustion and hunger, or what I believe is more likely, to free itself of the useless burden it was carrying. I was left on foot, humbled by nature, broken by hunger, not having and not planning to look for anyone to help me. I do not know how long I lay out there on the ground, but when I woke and was not hungry, and there were goat herds with me, who undoubtedly were the ones who helped me in my need, because they told me how they found me, and how I was saying so many foolish things and raving so much that I clearly had lost my reason. From that time on, I have felt that I am not always in my right mind, and my reason is so damaged and weak that I do 1,000 mad acts, tearing my clothes, shouting in these desolate places, cursing my fate, and repeating in vain the beloved name of my enemy, having no other purpose or intention than to shout my life to an end. When I come back to myself, I am tired and bruised, and I can barely move. My most common abode is in the hollow of a cork tree, large enough to shelter this miserable body. The drovers and goat herds who wander these mountains, moved by charity, sustain me, placing food along the paths and around the rocky crags where they knew I may pass by and find it, and so, although I may be out of my mind at the time, the demands of nature allow me to recognize sustenance and awaken in me the desires to want it and the will to take it. When I am rational, they tell me that at other times I go out onto the paths and take food by force, though they willingly give it to me, from the shepherds who carry it up the village to the sheepfolds. In this manner I spend my miserable and intemperate life until it is heaven's will that it come to an end, or my memory does, so that I cannot remember the beauty and betrayal of Lucinda and the wrong done to me by Don Fernando. If heaven does this without taking my life, I shall turn my thoughts to more reasonable discourse. If not, all I can do is pray that heaven has mercy on my soul, for I do not have the courage or strength to remove my body from the rigorous and difficult place where I have chosen to put it. This is, senores, the bitter history of my misfortune. Tell me if it is such that it can be heard with less grief than you have seen in me, and do not bother to persuade or counsel me with what reason tells you can be beneficial or helpful to me, for it will profit me as much as the medicine prescribed by a famous physician for a patient who refuses to take it. I do not want health without Lucinda, and since she has chosen to belong to another when she was, or should have been mine, I choose affliction as my portion when it could have been good fortune. She wanted, with her fickleness, to make my destruction constant. I want, by trying to destroy myself, to satisfy her desire, and it will be an example to those who come after me that I lacked only what all unfortunate men have in abundance, for whom the impossibility of finding my comfort is consolation, but for me it is reason for even greater griefs and ills, because I think they will not end even my death, even with death. Here Cardenio ended the long recounting of his history, as unfortunate as it was amorous. As the priest was prepping to say some words of consolation to him, he was interrupted by a voice, and they heard it saying in pitiable accents what will be told in the fourth part of this narration. For here the third part was concluded by that wise and judicious historian, Cid Hamate Benengeli. Perfect timing. Excellent. All right, so that was the end of chapter 27. That was a good one. And now we know the full story of the ragged one. That was good. I am still really enjoying the writing style. I'm really enjoying the humor. And with the levity, there's also this underlying grief and I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like upset, being upset. I guess I don't know. I don't know. Words are hard. I can't do the words. But yes, that's gonna be it for today. Thank you all for being here. We will continue right where we left off next week. And yeah, that'll be it. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate your support and appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you very soon. Bye.